Okay, so this is a special episode of The Week in Doubt, and today I have Anonymous Steve of the Skepticule podcast. And as we know of today, the only person, shall I say, the United Kingdom as a whole,
Yes.
who's ever been ordered by a judge to have to attend Mass and actually to take your children to Catholic Mass. And by trade, you're a professor of psychology?
I used to teach at universities. Now I'm a doctor of psychology, but I work in private areas now.
Excellent. And that's fascinating. I don't know how much it ties into the whole freedom of religion, atheist angle, but I've long been fascinated by the whole field of psychology. And so hats off to you for that. And
Well,
also,
if you ever work it out, Phil, then you let me know.
if I work out what?
Psychology.
Oh, psychology. Well,
because I haven't got to the bottom of it yet.
I usually don't admit this to my listeners. I have touched on it, but I have a history myself of wrestling with anxiety, depression. I've done talk therapy, cognitive therapy. So hats off to therapists. I've known a number of them.
I think it's normal, Phil, for not only for podcasters, but I think it's fairly normal for people who think skeptically and atheistically anyway. I think if you're going to start thinking about some of these things rather than going for easy solutions, the door is open for depression and anxiety. I think it's normal.
Yeah, I mean, I know I went through a number of, to borrow religious terminology, dark nights of the soul,
Yes.
existential episodes, and that's why sometimes I get a little offended when sometimes you'll hear Christian. It's kind of an old Christian apologist chestnut that atheists really believe in God. They just don't want to admit it, but deep down they believe. And
It's the most insulting. It's the most
Yeah.
insulting thing that they can say to us, isn't it?
It is, because my unbelief was very hard won. There's a time in my life when nothing was more nightmarish than the prospect that there might not be a God or an afterlife. And I was raised Roman Catholic. And
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm mostly Italian. There's a good deal of Irish in the family tree, too. Well, both my grandfathers were pure Italian, one from northern Italy, one from southern Italy. One grandmother was Irish, family from County Cork, and the other grandmother French and English. But predominantly, kind of culturally, we're Italian American. So from the cradle, I was brought up Roman Catholic, all the superstition, all the dogma. Watch out for everything you do. You never know when you're going to open up a portal for demonic activity.
Oh, wow. Isn't it funny how that American Catholics are more Catholic than Italian Catholics and more Catholic than Irish Catholics, and American Protestants are more Protestant than Protestants in England and elsewhere in Europe where it started. It never strikes me as amazing how extreme some of the views are in America.
Yeah, it is true. And since the inception of my podcast, I've had the pleasure of making friends with a number of people across the pond, and that's the comment they all make. They're just kind of, I'll borrow your vernacular, the gobsmacked.
Yeah, absolutely.
By how religious.
It is amazing. I mean, you and the other podcasters from America have taught me an awful lot about America, and it still never ceases to knock me sideways. How can these people believe this nonsense?
Yeah, it is funny, and I just did that episode that you had told me that you enjoyed about the religion of the founding fathers.
Yes, that was great, and I tell you, Paine. I thought I've read Paine before many years ago, but when you recounted some quotes from Paine, it could have been Hitchens.
Oh, absolutely. And I think Hitchens was actually a big admirer of Thomas Paine. And Hitchens was also a biographer of Thomas Jefferson. And both of them are two of the most deistic, or two of the most religiously, two of the most secular or skeptical of the founding fathers.
it almost seems as if this might sound insulting. I don't mean it to be, but it almost seems as if there's a something about America that asks to be attached to some kind of a superior thought. I mean, even the founding fathers are almost deified, aren't they?
Absolutely. And what's funny is that I've long had an interest in ancient history and world history, but I always found kind of modern or American history to be rather boring, which is an awful thing for an American to say. But I have to tell you, now as an adult and now as someone who's really come to embrace their unbelief, I don't think I've ever been more proud to be an American or more proud to inherit the legacy of the founding fathers than after I actually read up on their actual beliefs.
Sure.
And
if you're going to have heroes, to put it mildly, deified people, half deified people, you couldn't ask for much better, could you? I mean, they are great heroes to follow.
And it's absolutely unbelievable because the kind of narrative I was raised with, and I mentioned this in that episode, is that I always thought that mom, apple pie, the founding fathers, and Christianity were all neatly wrapped up in this one patriotic bundle. And there's even a famous painting of, I believe it might be the signing of the Declaration of Independence, that has all the founding fathers gathered around and Jesus in the midst of them. And I was thinking to myself recently, how would that really have been? I can just imagine them looking at Jesus and saying, "You do know we're deists, right?" And
and here's the weird thing is that I'm sitting in a house that's probably about 3 times as old as your country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I think to me, I was incredibly uplifted to learn just how deistic the founding fathers were, how much they really valued the separation of church and state. A lot of right-wing Christians talk about the separation of church and state, and I think they take it for granted, and they don't realize just how much a product of the Enlightenment, of the European Enlightenment, the founding fathers were.
Yes, and how quickly that was abandoned.
Yes, it's unbelievable. And I thought it might have been over the past couple of days, I forget where I heard it, someone had mentioned something about one of the reasons why the American South tends to particularly be so kind of hyper-religious might have something to do with the reaction to the kind of post-Reconstructionism or post-Civil War, and having lost the Civil War and the fall of the institution of slavery, etc. That's kind of perhaps neither here nor there, but I figured I'd chuck it out there because I just heard that over the past couple of days. But of course, we're all familiar with the saying, the Bible Belt, and the American South is infamously fundamentalist Christian.
Yes. But when you say the Americans flew to the moon, I don't get an image of people in the southern states. I mean, it's really unfair of me, but I don't get an image. Or if I do get an image, it's not a very it's quite it's not a very nice image. If you like, it's a funny.
Do you picture them in like a beat up garbage can with a rocket tied to it? Or something?
Yeah, that's what I picture. Yeah. So when I think of flying to the moon, I think New York, Washington, I think of those sorts of places, and that other huge chunk of your country just doesn't crop up in my thinking at all.
Yeah, I guess in fairness, I'm sure there was probably a lot of astronauts or people involved in the space program who might have been from there. But I think there is rightly this stereotype of the American South as this kind of backwater where that's just a breeding pool for ignorance and religious fundamentalism. Of course, there are erudite people and non-believers and atheists from the South too, and they'll be the first to tell you what they have to deal with. My access to the South is even more limited than my access to the North.
But in the past, of course, my access to America was what I got in the media over here. And it didn't, well, I suppose a lot of people in Europe, you must cringe at this, but the European view of America is seen through the lens of what we see through the media, obviously.
Jerry Springer.
But now that the main American voice I hear is a podcaster's voice, a skeptical or an atheist podcaster, my whole view of America's changed. And now I listen to Atheists on Air and things like that from the South, and Wild Bill Clare on YouTube. And obviously it's giving me a whole new idea of the fact that you can't generalize about these places like it's so easy to.
And it is funny because I often talk about on this show how I think, it's funny because atheism really isn't a creed. Another famous Christian apologist, Chestnut, is that atheism is a religion like any other religion, when in fact it's the absence of belief. And I was recently thinking to myself, kind of comically resorting to humor instead of pulling my hair out when dealing with these kind
of desperation,
comments, is that it's not like atheists ever came to my door like Jehovah's Witnesses and saying,
no.
Can we tell you about the bad news? Or that, I felt that I needed a lack of meaning in my life, so I went down to the local atheist hall of worship or non-worship or something.
That's right. And you get two non-things are not the same. A non-stamp collector could be a psychopathic killer, and a different non-stamp collector could be a nurse. The absence of something it has absolutely nothing to say about anything other than that one thing that they share, an absence.
That's true. And I think another thing I think about is that to believe in a religion, you really, with maybe some exceptions like, say, an adult convert or something like that, you really need indoctrination. Where with me, and I find this is the same with other non-believers, is that I tried to believe, I was taught to believe. Like I said, the idea of there not being a God or an afterlife was absolutely truly nightmarish when I was young. But my reason worked like acid on my faith.
Yeah. Well, that's the weird thing. See, over here, we don't necessarily we don't have to go through that process. Mm-hmm. If I think about the really religious people in my life, at all in my life, I can think of one person that's cropped up, and it just happened to be someone who lived about 6 doors away from my house when I grew up. That's how I can't even remember his name. That's how few people who are very, very religious have occurred into in my life. I just can't think of anyone else. There was a teacher at school. There was one teacher, and of course everyone knew that he was religious because he was the odd one out being religious. And I can't remember his name either. I mean that's how unusual it is here to have to, or in my experience, to come across people with, a deep faith.
Well, and that brings me to I don't have a lot of knowledge about the Church of England, but isn't the Church of England fairly or relatively compared to religious churches at least kind of
No, you put it right there in one go. Most people's opinions about the Church of England is that it's not a religious church.
Right, it's fairly kind of progressive or secular, or maybe there's like a figurative interpretation perhaps.
Well, obviously there are people in the Church of England who truly deeply believe, but generally speaking it's the default. Most people in this country are probably Church of England because that's what it says on the bit of paper. Because if you can't think of anything else to write on a bit of paper when someone's born, you just tick that box. It's just the bog standard, nothing to declare box. And that can mean, presumably, someone with real deep faith. But I think in the vast majority of cases, for example, there's a TV program here called Songs of Praise. It's on once a week, and it's in a church with a sermon and singing and stuff, and I don't watch it, obviously, but I understand from people who have been to the services that they're packed solid when the TV cameras are there, and the next week it's back to 2 men and a dog,
Oh, wow. Now, judging, it's funny, I've heard a lot of English friends say that America has given them some of their favorite atheist podcasters, and I've kind of replied that England has given some of our favorite atheists like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. And I've seen Dawkins interview some clergymen from the Church of England, and at least the ones I've seen Dawkins interview, they do seem to have this kind of thin, malleable, figurative approach.
Wishy-washy. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Like I say, there are some people who are truly devout, I'm sure, but the vast majority of people in the Church of England, it is pretty much a kind of churchy club. It's kind of it's it's like well, I guess what you in America might call I think of the phrase for it. I can't think what it is, but it's like a Christmas Christian kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Once a year, go along. Right. And they probably if asked, they probably say I go to church every week, but they don't actually. Not really.
And it might provide it might act like a social glue rather than actually providing some kind of literal religious foundation or something like that.
Yeah, not even really. I mean, you have social Jews, don't you? People
right.
who are cultural Jews rather than religious Jews. Well, it's even weaker than that, I'd say, over here.
Wow. And that's saying something, because as I understand it, and that's weird, there's this whole area of religion. There's Jews and Christian. I'm trying to think. There's if you watch a lot of atheist debates, you might have atheist versus theist. You might have seen some of the famous atheist debaters go head to head with a guy named Rabbi David Wolpe. And he seems to not have a literal belief in a personal God. His belief seems to be very figurative.
Give me that name again, Phil.
It's Rabbi David Wolpe, Wolpe. I think he's debated Hitchens. He's debated Sam Harris.
Right.
And to listen to him talk is almost like listening to Reza Aslan. They have this very figurative type of approach to religion where everything is so symbolic that you wonder, what the hell are you left with to hang your hat on, really?
Yeah, it seems to me that most people in the Church of England, C of E, as we call it, most people, my guess is that most people would not believe in a literal hell. Most people would not believe in a literal virgin birth. Those sort of concepts are really alien to our society, I think. They'll say there will be a few freaks that will come out of the woodwork, granted. But apart from them, most people don't believe in hell, don't believe in heaven, don't believe in virgin birth, don't really believe in walking on water. I've met very, very few people in my life who believe that stuff.
And that's kind of in keeping, and maybe there is some connection there with the founding fathers, who were, of course, originally from England. And I think George Washington had an association with both the Unitarian and Episcopal churches, and I guess it was pretty common, and this would probably just make the religious right in America make their jaws hit the floor, that many of the founding fathers, whether they be deists or theistic rationalists, didn't believe in things like the triune nature of God, like the Trinity, the virgin birth, things like that. And of course, Jefferson had what's come to be known as the Jefferson Bible, where he literally took a razor to the Bible and hacked away most of the miraculous bits.
Yes.
So you were just left really with the wise sayings and moral teachings of Jesus of Nazareth.
And what that isn't that the most sane thing you can do and still have that book? Because
absolutely.
It's bollocks, isn't it? I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, we can get into some quite airy-fairy debates about evidence and nature of evidence, nature of epistemology and that sort of stuff. We can talk about that quite a long time. But, most of it, you don't need to use that sort of language. It's just bollocks.
Absolutely. And I think, like I mentioned, my love of kind of like ancient history and world history, things like that. And I noticed from a young age, one of the things that kind of, like I said, worked on my faith like acid was I was a child with a pretty active imagination. I used to like to draw dragons and mythological creatures and stuff. So from an early age, I studied mythology. Mythology led me into an interest in world religion. And I realized how much mythology has in common with the living religions of today, and how much the Abrahamic faiths borrowed from those dead religions we now call mythologies. You know, you look at things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, how it's a precedent for the flood narrative and things like that. Things like how the 25th of December used to be a Mithraic feast day, and then it becomes supposedly the birthday of Jesus. You just notice all this stuff, and you start to really notice the man-made nature of religion.
As an atheist, I feel I've missed out here, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I don't have this experience. I almost feel like I don't belong in the atheist environment, because so many atheists, prominent atheists, well, the ones who have podcasts, so many of them have had this experience. And there's a philosopher called Nagel who says no perfect neuroscientists could ever know what it's like to be a bat.
Right.
Now, philosophically, I could have a long debate about that. I think it's crap, but I don't agree with him. But on this point, though, I don't know what it's like to come to disbelieve things I've believed, and I have missed out on part of that experience. It's something I can't talk about with the same authority that you and other people can.
Well, no, it's funny. I think that, to put it simply, atheists kind of come in two flavors. You know, there's the atheist who started out as a believer and had to wrestle with the loss of God. And then there's an atheist who, the type of atheist who has a secular upbringing. And it's not that they're rebelling against the religiosity of their youth. They just never had it. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think they're both two valid experiences or valid paths, you know?
Yes, I'm not suggesting that I have no legitimacy because of that position. I'm just saying I feel like I've missed out on an experience and can't speak to it. And when other people speak to their deconversion story, right, I just shut up because I've got nothing to add.
Or maybe you feel like you're lacking some kind of insider knowledge, because when you're indoctrinated into a religion and then you slowly break away from it, you kind of firsthand up and close know all the little tricks, what it's like to hold that worldview.
Yes, right. That's true. This is the epistemological problem, isn't it? I've never been you. I've never been anyone else apart from me. And the only world I've ever experienced is my own. I do not know what it's like to be a woman. I do not know what it's like to be black. As it happens, I'm not black, so I can say that. I don't know what it's like to really believe in a religion. And no one will know what it's like to be Steve. So, it's one of those things I guess we put up with in life, isn't it? That we speak to from our own authority and only that.
Right. And I think both types of atheism or both type of atheist experiences have their advantages. Like I said, if you were indoctrinated as a child, I think, I could probably help inform someone of what a child goes through, what it's like to be indoctrinated, what it's like to have those beliefs and then reason your way out of them or lose them. And someone who's never been indoctrinated might have a clearer view of just how crazy that worldview is. And in a way, I think it's an advantage to have your point of view or perspective kind of corrupted or polluted by it.
Fair enough, but here's another angle then. Okay, that's I mean, like I say, I'm not discounting my view as illegitimate. I'm just saying that I lack some experience. Perhaps, though, how about this? Perhaps if I had, this is the question to what you are as a person. As a person that you were indoctrinated, yet you got out. Right. Like the Godfather trying to get out. They called me,
they pulled
bring
me back.
Yeah. So in a way, you have a validation that I will never have, in that you know that you had maybe the strength of character or something about you, something in your genes that enabled you to throw off that false belief. Whereas I suppose we'll never know whether I can. I mean, I can suspect, but that doesn't matter, does it? All I can say is I don't actually know whether I'm the sort of person that would have been able to escape indoctrination.
Well,
Who knows?
What's really funny though is because I think this is actually a great conversation we're having right now, because it's almost like I hear a little bit of envy, and I kind of feel the same way towards the other side, the other type of atheist, because I sometimes wonder what it'd be like to never feel the pull of that superstitious indoctrination, of that superstition-laden indoctrination, and have to try to struggle with it, and have to, fight to break away from it, and really assert your reason. And this is perhaps an admission I've never made on the show before. And I remember watching one of the Richard Dawkins BBC series. I don't know if it was the root of all evil, maybe it was called, but he did a couple of them. And there's one where he's talking with, I think she's a female psychologist who is now helping people who have left a religion kind of recover from their experience of indoctrination. And even though she's a non-believer and she's a very rational thinker, she's telling Richard Dawkins what it's like to believe in hell and how traumatic that can be for a child. And she's talking about, and her voice is maybe quaking a little, how even talking about it as a woman who probably looks like she might be in her 50s or 60s, it still gets to her. And even though I'm a non-believer, and even though I have some really concrete, rational reasons why I don't believe, I think there is still a hint of that indoctrinated child in me, where sometimes I'll feel a little bit of a fear of hellfire, or, oh no, what if it was true and I left it? And then I have to reason with myself and knock it back down. And
Can I ask you, Bill, are there any circumstances that you can imagine in which you would regain that faith?
I don't think so. Like I said, I can feel those moments of weakness where there's that kind of superstitious side of me, or maybe vestiges of that indoctrinated child. And as a psychologist, you of course know how powerful those early experiences are, how they shape us and stay with us. And but
yes, that's true. But also don't discount the power of overthrowing that. I actually stress more in my work. I stress more adult experiences. I don't overstate, in my opinion. Some people overstate the effect of being a child on being an adult. You'll never shake off those experiences completely. Right. But I resist some of this temptation to say, show me the child at 5 and I'll show you the man. I don't think so.
It's kind of Freudian stuff or whatever.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely not Freudian. But I think the power of overthrowing something can be very strong. But I was just curious as to whether you had any, whether you could imagine any extreme situation. I'm very interested in my work's taken me to extreme situations. Mm-hmm. So I've worked with prisoners who will never get out of prison. I've been in a war, and I've touched upon areas which are quite difficult for people, because that happens to be an area of interest of mine, as to what happens, what gets revealed about the true person in extremis. So that's something which I've been delved into quite a bit. So I was just curious, really, whether there was anything that you thought that could have.
I'm so glad you bring this up. And it's funny, I don't think there is any circumstance, even in those moments of weakness, where I would go back. And of course, one reason is just the logical kind of empirical reasons why I don't think the supernatural claims of any religion, including the one I was brought up in, are true. But the biggest reason why, and it's a matter of principle, is that another thing that drives me nuts that you sometimes hear from Christians, and everyone thinks it's the big gotcha. And whenever you watch a debate between atheists and theists, and they allow questions from the audience, this inevitably comes up. Someone in the audience will smugly ask, "What if you're wrong?" You know,
Oh, God.
And so. And this is why I absolutely detest, on moral grounds, Pascal's wager.
Absolutely.
Because Pascal's wager says, well, we don't know for sure, but just in case God is real and hell is real, and
we should all be Muslims.
Yeah, we should all believe in whatever religion it is, just in case, kind of hedging our bets. And I think that is morally abhorrent. And
God's going to be fooled by that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's one thing. That's a good point too. It's insulting to God if he, she, or it actually existed, but it's insulting to God on two counts. One, because you're saying you can fool them in that way, and another, it's saying it's painting God as cosmic bully. What type of God is that would send you to eternal perdition just because you didn't pay lip service or bow down out of fear? I would hope that any deity worth worshipping.
I'm with Stephen Fry on this. This God that doesn't exist. If it did, and if it just so happened to be this one that the Christians keep going on about, Stephen Fry's got this right. How dare he do what he does? How dare he give childhood cancer and stuff like that? And, I don't know if you know the expression in England. It might be American, actually. I wouldn't want to be a member of the club that would want me in it.
Exactly.
So, I'm not going to bet. I mean, also, isn't it horrible? I don't want to spend eternity bowing to God. That is hell.
Right. Or it's just, I think it's so, what's really abhorrent about it is this weird idea that a being that would be enlightened and all-knowing, and yet they require you to constantly be praising and acknowledging them.
How insecure is that?
Yeah, like that's some grand kind of self-esteem complex or something. So
you answered my question though, Phil, haven't you? Because I think it seems to me that my question to you was, are there any circumstances in which you could return to the faith? And your answer seems to me to be, well, I can't unlearn everything I've learned since.
Well, yeah, that's one reason. And also out of moral principle would be the biggest issue. Like I said, just because I basically find Pascal's wager to be offensive, and being a non-believer and thinking that there's not any empirical evidence for the supernatural claims of any religion, for me to kind of, out of some desperate sense for consolation or to hedge my bets, to embrace a religion, it would be a kind of Pascal's wager scenario.
Sure, I see, yeah.
I can't ever imagine myself, going through the kind of Christian apologetic gymnastics that it would take to try to convince myself empirically that there was a God. And I actually think the whole field of Christian apologetics, it's so inherently intellectually dishonest.
Absolutely.
It's a whole discipline where you have people trying to think of ways, twisting themselves into cognitive pretzels to try to think of ways to convince themselves that their faith claims might be true.
Sure. Well, you've actually given the three of the most offensive apologetics or questions to atheists. One was, what if you're wrong? Mm-hmm. One was, I'm trying to think of the other two now, but you've listed three of them anyway. But the fourth one for me is, there are no atheists in foxholes. And that one gets on me because I've been in a foxhole. Wow. And when I got shot at, I got to tell you, it wasn't like I thought about it and thought, no, it didn't even cross my mind. I mean, the whole heaven and hell and God and nothing like that. Not even atheism occurred to me. In those situations, it just didn't. It wasn't anywhere near my radar. The whole time I was there, I don't think I thought of religion and God at all, other than, my God, isn't religion screwing this country up? But that might have been that, maybe. But that's about it.
Probably more like adrenaline and survival instinct or something like that.
Sure, and I suppose what I don't know, because I've never had it, not in my memory. I'm sure as a child, maybe I believed in Santa. I know that I believed in Loch Ness Monster for a little while because I just liked the idea. Just not a nice idea. But that's as bad as I could think. That's my most embarrassing possible, semi-religious experience, is believing in Loch Ness Monster for too long.
and religious people get upset. They think it's kind of glib or disrespectful when atheists compare God to Santa or the Loch Ness Monster, but it really is, when you think of it, a valid comparison. Because
it's not valid, Phil. It's far more likely to be a Loch Ness Monster than there is a God.
I didn't see you going that way, but yeah.
It's true. And also, a man could fit down maybe one of my chimneys. It's a very old house. Maybe a fat man could squeeze down. All of the chimneys is pushing it a bit, granted. Yeah, all right, granted, that's pushing it a bit. But there was probably a real person who the story was named after. There are records that suggest there was such a person.
Yeah, Santa's a weird amalgam character. He's partly based on Saint Nicholas, I believe, a Turkish bishop.
Indeed.
There's some story about him, like throwing coins through windows or leaving coins inside shoes for young maidens or something like that, and then who couldn't afford dowries or something like that. And then I think it's also part the Nordic Odin.
Yes.
And then of course we bring American commercialism into it,
Coke and stuff.
The Night Before Christmas and Coca-Cola ads, and you end up with the modern Santa Claus.
Whereas for Jesus, just Jesus, let alone God, but for Jesus as a person, I'm agnostic as to whether such a person actually ever existed.
Me too.
I listen to Price, I listen to Carrier and people like that, and it's all. As far as I'm concerned, the jury is out. I haven't made my mind up yet, but that's Jesus. I mean, to talk about God, there certainly wasn't any person that is at all recognisable as any personality, I should say, that can be reflected onto this God chap or chapess, as opposed to Santa, which itself is absurd. And Loch Ness Monster, well, like I say, I don't believe in it, and there's loads of evidence why it can't possibly exist. But
more likely, there might be a plesiosaur that swam into the wrong
really unlikely. Really unlikely. But if there was, it wouldn't throw all my knowledge of the world out the window.
It'd be like finding the coelacanth or something.
It'd be even more. It would be more extreme than that. But even so, it would not change my life. But if a God existed, well, geez, that would be everything would be different, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and well, that's a funny thing about you brought up like Robert M. Price and Richard Carrier, and I know that a lot of people on the opposing side think that it's really extreme to suggest there might not have been a historical Jesus. And it's not like I question Jesus's historicity out of some sense of malice or because I'm a non-believer and I don't want to be true. And I say this partially in sympathy with Christians, but I think the reason why we can't be as sure about the existence of Jesus as we can, say, Caesar Augustus or Alexander the Great is because even if he did exist, he wasn't a worldly conqueror. He didn't leave behind buildings, coins, and monuments.
Yes.
He would have basically had the robe on his back. So,
yes, and I always thought that possibly there was some healer or some kind of hippie who was wandering around the desert.
Right.
And then, thanks to Price, I now understand that Paul's writings came first before
the Gospels.
Yeah. Which is very interesting, isn't it?
Mind-blowing.
This guy just, had some kind of incident on the way to Damascus, and as rationalists, we don't think he had an experience that involved a personality, a godly personality.
Oh, Steve, you just brought up something. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this goes to your question about are there any circumstances that could lead me back to believe?
Go for it.
And I was thinking just kind of philosophical ways that I might end up, leading myself back to believing or kind of copping out or accepting religion as consolation. But I think it would take.
I'm listening, Phil. I'm your therapist for the night.
Okay, it would take like a road to Damascus type of episode. I would need like a full-on apparition or something like that, and I know I've heard like Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins talk about if they had a kind of road to Damascus episode, they still might not believe because they'd probably ask themselves, maybe I'm just crazy. And this kind of ties in with you being a psychologist. I don't want to throw any of my family members under the bus or admit too much, but I was lucky enough just to get depression and anxiety. But there's members of my family who have schizotypical symptoms, who've experienced auditory and visual hallucinations. And I know that people who hallucinate, the hallucinations are so strong that it's very hard to convince them, even after being treated, that they weren't real. So if you find yourself asking yourself if you're nuts, there's a good chance that you're not nuts.
Well, Matt Dillahunty has quite a nice line on this, doesn't he? He said, the question is, what would convince you? And his line is, look, I don't know, but if there was a God, he would know what would convince me.
Right, or I just discovered recently Eddie Tabash, and I think I posted a couple of links on the Weekend Out Facebook page, and I almost posted one directly to you, but I was hoping maybe you'd see it posted. He's a constitutional lawyer and a staunch atheist. I think he's either the head or one of the heads of the Center for Inquiry. And he did a whole lecture, which I posted to the Facebook page, on the separation of church and state. And he talks about the founding fathers and their very strong beliefs about the separation of church and state and about their deistic views. And in debates, when he talks about what would convince him, he has this whole funny kind of skit where he says, if this podium turned to green mist, if my dead father walked in the room and said, why are you debating this Christian? If we suddenly levitated up to the ceiling, then I might believe. And that's probably the same with me. It would take something like that. You know what I mean?
I would have to ask what was going on, I think.
Okay. So, Steve, you were talking about your war experience, your kind of literal experience in a literal foxhole. What war specifically did you have experience in?
Well, I was a lecturer at several universities, lecturer in psychology, and an opportunity came up to go to Yugoslavia during the war, and I joined into the humanitarian aid convoys, which actually did go right to the front lines. So I did experience being under fire and stuff like that. And for me, there was two sides to it. One, I used to be a truck driver before I became an academic, so I could actually put some experience to good use. And at the same time, I thought, well, this is the perfect time for sabbatical to experience something extreme myself, to find out how I react to it, and to find out how other people react to it. And so it was really just a bit of a, as well as say, it was a good purpose. I wasn't there just for fun.
Right.
But it also meant I could experience something which would help me in my work. Really, that's it. I mean, the only real relevance to atheism is that God didn't crop up. Wow.
And that reminds me of something... it might sound weird for an atheist or a non-believer, and maybe I should clarify. I think for like 75% maybe of the podcast, I'm up to like 130-something episodes, I used to talk about how I really eschewed labels. I finally kind of settled on the label agnostic atheist.
Okay.
Which sounds somewhat contradictory. And
No, not at all. One's knowledge claim and one's a belief claim.
Right, which I mean, I think that at least, who knows, maybe science might progress to the point someday where we can definitively explain, like Lawrence Krauss and Stephen Hawking are touching on, how something can come from nothing, and we really can once and for all get God out of the equation. You know what I mean? But for now,
I'm fairly antagonistic to religion. I see it as a very negative force in our society. That being said, I think some of our best universities wouldn't be there. I never got there without the backing of the of the churches. I think the churches have given us a lot of fantastic art, literature,
music,
not the Bible, other literature, music,
not Christian rock, but like the music,
no,
Middle Ages and the Baroque period,
and philosophy. Philosophy, a lot of philosophy comes from religion.
Absolutely,
but now left it. I kind of feel that we thanks very much, religion. I appreciate all the backing you gave us back there, but it's over now and we don't need you anymore. And I'm quite antagonistic. I mean, obviously my own experience, being required to go to Catholic Mass hasn't helped with with that attitude. I used to think that hard atheism was almost as bigoted as hard belief.
Right.
I'm much more inclined now to be quite antagonistic, but you have to accept. I reluctantly have to accept that there's a real tiny chance. I mean, I'm talking deism here, not theism.
Right.
But really, as you say, who started the ball rolling, or was there a great programmer who wrote the program that we're sitting in now? You know, there could be some kind of some personality behind it all. But I tell you what, it isn't. It isn't Allah, and it isn't Yahweh, and it isn't any of these people, because those are so obviously human creations. They're so human that it's bizarre to think a God could be that human.
Yeah, and we can see the concepts evolve in religions growing out of other religions, monotheism growing out of polytheism.
Yes,
and that's
coming out of spirits. Yes, that's right. I mean, you could, and also, obviously, if you were just knocking around 10,000 years ago, knocking around the woods trying to explain your world so that you could understand it, so that you could help yourself live in it, because that's the reason for it. The reason why you want to understand is to maximize the potential of your genes flowing to the next generation. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do when thunder happens and lightning happens? Obviously, you're going to try and explain it, and obviously you're going to find some kind of personality behind something which is otherwise inexplicable.
That's right. And that's, I mean, like, animism makes a kind of weird sense, and polytheism makes a kind of weird sense from a primitive point of view, when people didn't have this accumulated knowledge base about the natural world. Sure.
And wherever you start seeing some kind of structure, some kind of breakdown in what I might call a communist lifestyle, when you start seeing a primitive communist lifestyle,
right.
Whenever there's an opportunity, it seems, well, I've used this example before. When some terrible thing happens in the world, like a tsunami or an earthquake, right, how long does it take for someone to send you an email for a fake donation to try and scam
right.
some money, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems that we are uniquely talented to find any opening or some of us are uniquely talented to find an opening to make a quick quid. And it seems to me that once you start having animism and spirits, then if you were the person who could speak to those spirits, you get it cozy, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look in the Bible, I mean, it does seem to me that a lot of it, the Old Testament, is the story of priests giving themselves power and privilege and, sacrifices, and basically it's a nice meal ticket, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, if you think about books like Leviticus, which is basically a laundry list of
don'ts.
Yeah, of do's and don'ts of how you're supposed to act before the high priest and at the entrance to the temple, and what people should be. That's where some of the ugliest stuff is to be found. Books like Leviticus, Numbers, I think even some parts of Exodus. But the stuff about stoning people to death for adultery, wizardry,
and here's the weird
witchcraft.
thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Slight distraction from what you're saying, but we were talking earlier about the difference between American religion and American Christianity and British Christianity, and this is very sweeping, of course. But it seems to me that I don't ever remember meeting any Christians who referred to the Old Testament at all. I mean, we've dumped that, man. That's ancient history, literally.
Right.
Because over here the Old Testament is just fables, really. Maybe there's something you can learn from them as illustrators, but no. When I hear American Christians refer to the Old Testament and building bloody theme parks, God blimey,
Ken Ham, yeah,
yeah. That Old Testament thing is so weird. And yet, you even in America, you pick and choose, don't you? You don't want your mixed fabrics.
It's so, I think the term they use in America is cafeteria Catholicism or cafeteria Catholic, but I think it applies to Christianity broadly.
Sure.
And
I actually wasn't thinking about Catholic. I was thinking more about this, the kind of the evangelical
the Bible Belt
bunch.
stuff. Yeah, and it is really weird, like you said. And there's so many weird contradictions that you really do have to do these weird gymnastics to try to rationalize any of it, because taking the stories in the Old Testament literally seems absolutely preposterous, and of course it's morally problematic, which is why atheists bring up things like the slaughter of the Amalekites, the Midianites. Sure. Kill off the older women who have known a man, but the younger girls.
But don't you think it has the air of something that's been written by hundreds of different people over hundreds of generations for whatever self-serving reasons they did at the time? It has that kind of human taint to it, doesn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, that goes for the Old and New Testament. The Bible's basically one big anthology, and basically, two anthologies, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and some of the things you learn are just wild. Like another thing that ate away at my faith, and this is kind of funny, is that I was, even from a young age, I was a documentary junkie, and I used to like to watch things like Mysteries of the Bible and these different shows on history.
Sure, me too, yeah.
And A&E. And I remember learning at a young age about this thing called the documentary hypothesis. And it's this hypothesis that the Old Testament was written by different authors in different places in different kingdoms, because at one point we had this divide between, we had the kingdom of Judah and, we had this kind of, this broken kingdom with different accounts of the same tales going on, written by different authors. But it's called the documentary hypothesis, and it goes that one author is P, which stands for priest. One is J or Y for Yahweh or Jehovah. One is E for Elohim, and one is D for Deuteronomist. And Elohim was a name for God used by one group of ancient Jews, and Yahweh or Jehovah was a name written by a different group of authors. And it's funny because Elohim is kind of plural for El. El was patriarchal Canaanite god, kind of a supreme deity in the pantheon.
Sure.
And Elohim is plural, kind of like the way seraphim is plural of seraph, or cherubim is plural of cherub. And Christian apologists will say, well, this is probably the royal we. But other people say this is kind of pointing to there might be some kind of weird polytheistic undercurrent.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. I think there's no doubt, is there? That, I mean, you got to think about that. Even the fact that we've got two Eves for starters. The first Eve was the same name as Frasier's brother's wife, and I can't think what it was, in
Lilith.
Frasier.
Lilith.
Lilith.
That's from the the apocryphal text of the Hebrews. Yeah, Lilith. She was Adam's first wife, and she was kind of like an extreme feminist, where she didn't want to always be on the bottom during intercourse, and she got mad and flew off, and God changed her into a kind of infant blood-sucking demoness thing that attacked children and men in the night, kind of like an ancient succubus, kind of.
Yeah. And as I said to you earlier, we really must keep my ex-wife out of this.
Yeah. Oh man, no, it's funny though. I did, as a kid, I had a crush on Lilith from Frasier.
No,
I forget her real name. I forget.
I am your therapist, Phil. Anything you say to me between you and
confidential.
Me, yeah. Well, obviously you have got real problems there, man.
Yeah, BB Newworth. Yeah, she kind of looked like Lily Munster, kind of with a bun. But what was I going to say? Yeah, but there's another thing I learned from watching old, religious documentaries, is that there's also something called doublets. And this is a phrase or a term used by real biblical scholars. And it's a term for when there's more than one account of the same occurrence in the Old Testament. There's two stories of creation back to back, which get the order in which things were created wrong, or they contradict each other. There's two different versions of the Noah story with different numbers about how many animals went on the ark. And I think there's even a weird story in a different part of the Bible that mirrors the story of Lot, with the male angels who were threatened with rape and all this weird stuff. And those are called doublets. And this, once again, goes to your point that these are man-made books written by different authors. And of course, with the New Testament, you have...
the quadlets.
Yeah, the New Testament, you have the four Gospels. Three of them are called synoptic, meaning to see alike. And then there's the Gospel of John, which has Jesus dying on a different day.
Doesn't John have the walking cross, the talking walking cross?
Oh, I think that's... I don't know if that's a different apocryphal story or not.
Is it? Okay.
But William Lane Craig always talks about that in his debates. And he brings it up because he says, this is what legend or myth looks like. You got the talking cross and all this crazy stuff. But of course, the canonical Gospels are completely rational. You know. But William Lane Craig is kind of odd in that I think he's one of the few biblical scholars that considers the traditional or canonical Gospels to be journalistic, almost eyewitness accounts, where I think the mainstream view is that the Gospel authors weren't going for journalistic accuracy. They were using figurative language to try to speak to what they saw as a greater, a higher truth. And that's why you see a lot of weird stuff in the New Testament that parallels the Old Testament. The slaughter of the Exodus, the slaughter of the innocents parallels Moses in the Exodus story, where baby Moses escaping from Pharaoh and things like that. And Jesus, symbolism is used to compare Jesus to Moses and Elijah and things. Jesus is in the desert for 40 days, like the wandering Jews, etc. So it's weird, but who knows what the truth is? 'Cause you have some scholars like Reza Aslan who thinks that things are so figurative, you're left with nothing to hang your hat on.
Yeah, so what?
Yeah, and it's like, when that's the weird thing, there's a lot of otherwise rational Christians that will say, oh, of course, the story in the garden is a parable or an allegory, and the Noah's Ark story probably wasn't real either. But of course, the resurrection is true. But and that's probably because if you get rid of that one last miracle, the linchpin is pulled and everything falls.
Well, you said the C word, didn't you? William Lane Craig. So question for you, Phil.
Okay.
Because Craig's no idiot, right? Is he? He's no fool.
I think he's intellectually dishonest. I don't know if he knows he is.
There's the question. He's done the circuit several times. He's heard the arguments, and yet he still says the same stuff, even though he knows it's been. I would say, in some cases, proven to be contrary to what he says. So the question is he really a bit of a fraud now?
Okay, now see, this is where, if I can get your permission, I'd like to play psychologist. I'm going to try to shrink William Lane Craig, and you know what I think it is.
You think you need psychology? Okay, well, go for it.
Perhaps. Well, this is what I think. My armchair view of it. If you notice, William Lane Craig always ends his debates by proselytizing via his own conversion story. He talks about how when he was a young guy, maybe late teens or something like that, he wasn't brought up in a religious home, and he found religion and he opened his life up to Christ, and his whole life was changed for the better, and he invites the same thing to happen for the listener or whatever. And so I think what's going on with William Lane Craig, I think he's lying to himself in a way where I think he personally needs to believe. It had such a profound effect on him that I found my way out of my dark night of the soul the hard way. I just dealt with the problem of my own mortality, you know, until I became a nerd to it. But he embraced religion. He got religion. That's how he got through his dark night of the soul. So I think he needs to believe, but he wants to convince others, and he wants to defend his adopted religion tooth and nail to the end. So he reaches deep into the apologist bag of tricks, and he uses every type of cognitive gymnastic trick he can muster up to try to convince you it's real. I think.
Well, if what you say is right, Phil, I would have said he doesn't do a very good job at it.
No. Yeah. No, because I mean, it's kind of a thin veneer. Or although he talks like he thinks it all makes complete sense, it doesn't make complete sense.
I think he's bright enough to know better. I think and now at the point where at least some of the things he says it because he's paid to say it. It's his job to say it. I mean, it's only a person. I've got no insight here at all.
Right.
You know, I've got no insight into. He hasn't got a tell, you know. It's not like poker or something where I can go, gotcha.
Right.
You know, I can't do neuro-linguistic programming or anything like any funny tricks. It's just simply, I just think he's heard the answers too many times to keep asking the same questions.
No, that's actually a great point. Because if you think about that, if he's going head to head with all these atheists all the time, and not only is he hearing these logical counter arguments all the time, but he must be digesting them to some degree if he has to work to formulate defenses against those arguments. So he's well familiar with the counter arguments of the opposition, and has that worn his own faith down over time, you wonder.
Well, I wonder why he hasn't come up with why he hasn't moved the conversation on. Why does he keep retreating to the same arguments rather than saying, okay, I hear what you say about the problem of evil, and here is my answer. And I would say the reason is because he hasn't got one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's funny. That's the one area where you usually will see Christian apologists concede a little bit, but then they'll come up with some BS rationalization, is the problem of evil. And this is, okay, here's another chestnut that I find deeply insulting. We live in a fallen world. Okay. Now it's like, it's God's fallen world. He's the one that, so two most likely non-existent people, knowing what we know of genetics, what we know of anthropology and geology. Obviously, the Earth isn't 6,000 years old. Obviously, man evolved, so there weren't two, Homo sapiens that were magically plopped down on the Earth or whatever. But this idea that two people ate the wrong kind of fruit, so now we're really all in the shit. Hopefully you don't mind me swearing. It's a morally grotesque idea. Yes. That we're all kind of steeped in misery because two individuals ate the wrong kind of fruit. I mean, what does that say about the Creator if we're to indulge them and hypothetically, for the sake of argument, go with that scenario?
Well, it's even simpler, isn't it, that, Phil? It's simply this. God can create a world with free will and where there is no pain and no evil because he has created it. He created heaven. So there is the conversation's closed until William Lane Craig or anyone else can answer that question. We know God can create free will, places of free will, without pain. So why didn't he create this one like that?
That's actually a brilliant point. And because a big part of the excuse for evil they'll use is often the free will argument, that it's not God's fault. It's we're flawed. We make the bad decisions. Well, then of course God made us flawed, but it doesn't explain natural disasters. It doesn't explain tsunamis and earthquakes unless the right suddenly wants to acknowledge climate change. But of course there were natural disasters long before man-made pollution and things like that. And that's funny. That brings up, like, I think I was going to say before, but I forgot. Even though I'm a non-believer, I have kind of a romantic, quote unquote, spiritual side. And I'm a big fan.
Before you say that,
okay.
that's the fifth. There's a fifth worst insult. Because you're an atheist, you have no soul, you have no feeling, you have no love. You don't understand beauty because you're cold, calculating, evil, atheistic bastard. Well, no, that's the fifth most. That's what we've now come with 5 really insulting things to say to an atheist, and that's a big one for me. I really pisses me off, that one does.
Me too, and I'm usually pretty polite, say on YouTube and things like that. And I remember the one time I really got kind of angry was, and people for the most part have been polite to me, but I did one episode where I thought I rather fairly gave a breakdown of my thoughts on the story of Eben Alexander, the Harvard neurosurgeon who claimed to have had a near-death experience.
Oh, got him.
And I thought it was a fairly reasonable and respectful breakdown of it. And I said at the end of the day that we can't take one person's anecdotal experience as concrete proof of an afterlife. But I got inundated with criticism from everything from religious fundamentalists to new agey crystal toting sort of people. And some of the accusations were that I don't get spirituality or this and that. And I went on to explain how, since I was a young teenager, I've been writing music, poetry, song lyrics, that I'm someone who every day is moved by nature, someone who's easily moved by art, as Hitchens used to say, art and landscape. I think unless there's something really off about your wiring, all of us have access to this range of experience that people call transcendent or spiritual. The only difference is, I would say that those experiences, as rich and valid as they are products of the brain. And I'm a person who leans towards that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain.
There was no other explanation. I mean, I'm quite happy to hear an alternative explanation. I listen to it, but just give me one that isn't just fluffiness. And I think the whole idea of evolution and how the brain works or whatever, I think it's beautiful in itself. I don't need to have fluffiness added to it to make it any more pretty. I think of evolution, it's more fantastic and more amazing than God did it.
It is really, and I think if you look at it like an epic saga, if you think about rudimentary life struggling and slowly evolving and becoming more and more complex, all these myriad creatures falling and rising, it really is this kind of beautiful, epic journey. And in comparison, a kind of Sky Daddy going poof and bringing everything into existence, it's almost vulgar or childish in comparison.
Sure. It's mundane. It's inane. It's depthless, especially if you make it 6,000 years. It's a very short, stupid story.
And that's, speaking of intellectual dishonesty, I get a worst feeling of outrage when I listen to Ken Ham speak than William Lane Craig. Because here's this guy, I think Ken Ham at one point actually taught science, which just boggles my mind and makes me wonder what he was saying.
Oh, they've all done
kids.
that. Yeah. Was it the guy who got banged up and his son's carrying on his mission? Kent Hovind and Eric Hovind.
Oh, is that the dude who went to prison, I think?
Yeah.
Beware of slick talkers.
Yeah. And his son is nowhere near as good. At least his father was quite amusing in a funny sort of way.
Right.
His son's bloody awful. But again, a man who claims to have been a science teacher.
Unbelievable. And I'm trying to think how Ken Ham gets away with it. I think his excuse is he breaks science into two categories that mainstream science doesn't acknowledge. It's historical science and observational science. Observational science gives you X-ray machines and iPhones. Everything else that came before that is open to debate, and it's just speculation.
The Second World War. I don't know anything. Did it happen? I don't know. How would I know when the Second World War happened? Because, I wasn't there.
Right. Did Napoleon really exist and all this stupid stuff?
If you start taking that argument, it's honestly, it's an insult to intelligence. If I wasn't there is no evidence. It's just stupid, But it's desperation, Phil. This is where you go to when you've got nowhere else to turn. Exactly. And again, here's a man whose meal ticket is tied to his belief.
Oh, and what a meal ticket it is. You think about that creation museum he has. And then I recently covered a story on the show about that ARC project he's doing. And he was slated to gain millions.
18 million, wasn't it? 18 million?
Yeah, and tax rebates or incentives or something from the government.
And even then, he couldn't help himself and he blew it.
Oh, what did he do? Yeah, it fell through somehow, didn't it?
Oh, it was because he wanted to have employment practices which are illegal for a profit-making organisation.
The right to not hire non-Christians or something like that.
Well, you had to go to a church that not even just Christian, it had to be a church that he recognised as one that was good enough for his employees.
Wow.
Which, funny enough, takes you to my situation, doesn't it? When that someone could dictate what religion, if any, I follow or his workers follow is an insult. It's not about how often you have to go. It's just the whole idea that someone else can say, you can have a job if you go to a church. I approve. Honestly, it makes me sick.
Yeah, and that's what. It's funny because I wrote down all these questions concerning your case that I want to ask you. And I was imagining in my head, I always try to be intellectually honest about things and test my own ideas by thinking about what would the opposition say. And I was thinking, I'm like, this is such an atrocious and offensive case on face value. The idea of a judge not only ordering someone to take their children to church, but telling them what kind of church.
And his church.
And his church. Yeah, because I was reading that, this judge is Catholic, and he happens to have two sons himself, and he was comparing himself with his sons to you and his sons or something, wasn't he, that?
No, I don't recollect anything like that. That bit, I think, might be an add-on. That's not something I know of.
Yeah, I think that was from the Telegraph.
Well, you've got to bear in mind, yes, yeah. Well, obviously they might have delved into facts that I'm not aware of. Mm-hmm. I think you got to bear in mind that my ex-wife didn't ask for this. She's at no blame whatsoever in this. This judge came up with it himself, in line with his belief, and actually was a change to the circumstances. My kids never went to church at Christmas, but it's not even like it's a big ordeal. It's not even like, if my boys wanted to go to synagogue or mosque or whatever, mm-hmm. I would recognise that. It's not for me to tell them to be atheists. I'm glad my oldest son says that he doesn't believe in God. It's great, but I'm not going to love him any less if he becomes a Catholic or a Muslim or any kind of belief. It's not going to make any difference. And I'll back him because he has, in my view, freedom of thought. And if I'm not interested in what the law says. Morally, what kind of person would I be if I claim that I should have the freedom to believe what I believe and go to what religious ceremonies I want to go to if I didn't recognise that for my son as well? So, and if I was to go to Catholic Church, if my sons wanted to go, let's just say they did, they don't, let's just say they did, and I was to go along with them and, I don't know, play on my phone for an hour or something.
Right.
So what? But that's not the point, is it? It's not the amount, it's not the degree of imposition it is or how inconvenient it is. It's the whole principle. And this is why the church-state episodes was fresh in my mind when we started talking about doing an episode together. It's just this whole idea that a judge could feel that he had the authority to do this. And, of course, we've got a law that says he can't.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I remember feeling a kind of additional outrage when I was reading about your case. And I actually noted down what you just said, how your oldest son shows some interest in not being a believer or having a secular worldview. And
to be fair, Phil, he's got very little interest in it at all. He's very interested in me being on podcasts and stuff, and he's very interested in that. But he's not really interested in religion at all. He's not like me. He just doesn't care. He just doesn't believe in God. Full stop. End of.
Okay, so it's like it's not even like he's decided to carry the mantle of atheism or secular humanism. He's just not.
No, there's time. There's time for that, Phil. I'll knock on that door when he's a bit older. But at the moment, no, he's just not. He doesn't believe, and he doesn't care about it. He doesn't want to go. And as far as I'm concerned, well, actually, to be honest, that's how I felt at his age.
Yeah, but I remember feeling, because I went from feeling offended or outraged for you that there was this judge telling you not only how to raise your kids religiously and what church what kind of church you had to take them to, but now it's moving into him infringing on the rights of your son. Because what if your son doesn't want to be Catholic?
Which he doesn't.
And he's saying your son has to go to Catholic Mass.
Yes, there's various levels here. For me, I'm annoyed by it, but it's only me. For my son, it's effectively apostasy law because he's not allowed to. He can't become a Muslim.
Right.
He's got to go to Catholic Mass. So it's effectively a weird kind of apostasy law, only till he's 18, I suppose, but it's not the point, is it?
That's actually a great point. It is like some kind of fundamentalist Muslim apostasy thing.
Exactly. But the that outrages me on my son's behalf. Because obviously, he's my son. Obviously, the best thing in the world. There's no one gonna. Don't piss with my son because you piss with me.
Right.
But more than that, it's not even that. It's what kind of society do I want to live in? Do I want to live under a society in a society under the European Convention of Human Rights, which we are under, which says you may not interfere with people's faith or lack of it, and that we cannot be dictated to what religious ceremony, if any, we go to, how to have a religion realised. Do I want to live in that kind of society? I thought I lived in a society that was grown up enough where this sort of thing was impossible. And so there's three levels. It's a minor offence to me, okay, because it's me, right? So what? My son, now that's treading on my toes, big style. But also, like I say, this whole idea of what society do I live in? And I want to live in a society which is rational, secular, makes some kind of sense. And the outrage goes beyond whether I have a little bit of inconvenience to my lifestyle. I'm outraged because the judge was not allowed to do this. And he's been allowed to do it. And more so, the appeal court should have put it right. And the reason why it affects all of us now is because they failed to put it right, which makes it a precedent. And now it's a precedent. Anyone could be told to go to any religious ceremony for whatever reason, unless you're going to explain to me why my beliefs or my son's beliefs are less than a Jewish person's or a Muslim, then they are just as affected as I am. And I'm outraged as a Muslim. I'm outraged as a Jewish man. I'm outraged as a Christian. And I'm outraged as an atheist because we're all the same here. Mm-hmm. The judge can tell us to go somewhere we don't believe in.
I think it is, it's a fundamental human right. I think all of us part of the tension of belonging to a society is we all realize that there's rules, regulations, mores, but we want to believe that we at least have a certain level of basic autonomy when it comes to choosing what we want to believe, how we want to raise our children, and this judge just steamrolled over that.
Yes,
basically.
that's you're absolutely right. That's and the fact that the system didn't put it right. That's correct. It's the fact that it's the casual way it was done. The way he dropped in this fact about his Catholic faith that it was late on a Friday afternoon and he just did it. And everyone's back. A knee-jerk defended him. The system should have dealt with it. It didn't. They knee-jerk defended it. And it's rather lazy, slippery. It's this very, very British way of screwing things up. I've been on podcasts and people have, as I've been talking, I've come to realise people think in terms of America, in terms of a religious lobby, a religious judge, part of and I don't believe this is the situation. This isn't a religious conspiracy. This is a typical British screw-up. And that's really annoying.
Right. And it just got kind of lost in the shuffle of bureaucracy and no one turned it around like they should have.
Yeah, well, I was banging on their door every time saying, turn it around, turn it around, turn it around. And finally, just before Christmas, we had I took a judicial review in the High Court and I lost that. And I took it to appeal the judicial review, which effectively is, as I understand it, the highest level I could take it to. And that's why precedent has been set, because we've effectively gone through all the levels we can go to that we think of. And the judge said it's too minor an infringement.
Oh, please.
Well, it is a minor infringement to what I might be doing on one night every now and again. You know what I mean? It's not about. That's not the point, man. It's not about whether I would rather be playing chess with Phil Albercelli. That's not what it's about. It's about whether you may interfere with belief and where your belief is realised in a ceremony.
Now, I don't know if this is even pertinent or if I should mention it, but is it true the same judge, I think there was a case in Derby or something where after 15
Derby,
minutes...
yes.
Oh, Derby? Is that what it is?
I love it's nothing more funny than the Americans pronounce British. Yeah.
So it's not like Demolition Derby, it's Derby.
No, Derby, yeah.
So, but after a 15-minute hearing, he took,
dear.
what was it, 3 children away?
Yeah. A far more serious case than mine. Absolutely. I mean, mine pales into insignificance for the damage that did to that family. But even though that's far more serious than what happened to me, that didn't actually breach any human rights. It breached human decency. Mm-hmm. But I'm struggling to. I suppose yes, there is the right to family life. You could argue that there is a European Convention right that breached. But like I said, it's not as clear cut as this.
So the judge was in his rights in a way, even though it was a horrible decision. But he's not within his rights to tell you what church to attend. Basically.
Yeah, I don't want to try and compare the two. I would be offensive to the people concerned, and I don't want to offend the people concerned. If that had happened to me, that would be far more serious than what did happen to me. I don't want to play a game of, one-upmanship with these other people.
Right.
I'm just saying that I only speak to the case I was confronted with, and in the case I was confronted with, it was clear that a human right was breached, one that's recognised by law that we are supposed to follow.
Now, has this been going on since 2009?
No, that's a slight error. 2011 was when the decision was made.
Oh, okay,
Separation began in 2009, but the British legal system is not exactly efficient.
Okay. Now, I'm wondering, so you're talking about the European conventions convention that clearly states...
It is quite simple. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, absolutely.
That seems like a good idea, in which case we have always got an easy solution for that, called Google, because it's only 2 sentences. It's very straightforward.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Right, okay. Only 2 points here. Point 1, Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, teaching, practice, and observance. Point 2. And this is the key one. Freedom to manifest one's religion or belief shall be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of public safety, for the protection of public order, health or morals, or the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. And I don't see a case.
Wow. Yeah, and it even goes into observance and practice, which I
Absolutely.
think, yeah. So now I'm really illiterate when it comes to European law. Now, do these European conventions that, is it the whole UK falls under these conventions?
Okay. While we've been members of the European community, we could have turned to the European Court to decide matters that we felt weren't settled in British courts properly, as in there was a breach to the convention. Now, what happened about 15 years ago or so is that we absorbed ECHR, the European Convention, into our law.
Okay.
So effectively, we've imported a constitution, effectively.
So this isn't some peripheral thing. This has been assimilated into the body of your law, basically, right?
It's the bottom line.
Right. So I don't get it. How has this not been overturned? How is this still going on?
Well, I've been in some communication with the Ministry of Justice about this, and I'm waiting for an answer to my last question. What I said to them is effectively that law has now been changed by precedent. As in America, I think, the law is defined by precedent, isn't it?
Yes.
So you have a law.
Legal precedents, yeah.
Yeah, it just sits there until something happens, and then the judges decide what it means by a precedent. And so effectively, the judge in the court I went to, and the appeals process, has enshrined a kind of a brackets after point 2, which is except a judge may dictate which religious occasions you attend or do not attend.
Oh, that's crazy.
Because do not attend as well. Because don't forget, I can't go to the alternative.
That's you couldn't bring your sons to a synagogue or something like that.
Well, no, we're busy. We're busy then. We've got to go to mass.
Now, did you?
So by definition, if you have to go to one, you can't go to an alternative at the same time.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Now, did you mention in passing that you don't have to go to Christmas mass or whatever any longer, or you still have to do that?
Oh yes.
Because I was going to say, even
it still stands. I still, as we are at the moment, I have to go under threat of 2 years in prison, up to 2 years in prison. I have to go to mass with my boys. Yes.
That's so insane. Because I'm just thinking about there's even devout Catholics that don't go to mass on Christmas. There are some who do. I know even when I was younger, my family did, but then it became more about the presents and hanging out with family than attending mass. And I'm thinking, even if you were a devout, believing Catholic family, it would still be such an infringement to tell.
Oh, don't get me wrong. If you were a Catholic, this would be wrong too.
Yeah.
If I happen, I've never been Catholic. Not even according to some scratch on a bit of paper when I was born. No one in my family has ever been Catholic. We've been officially C of E. But if I was Catholic, it would still be wrong.
Absolutely, because maybe as a Catholic, you want to pick and choose which masses you attend.
Like most Catholics, yes.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that is unbelievable. Now, is there any, is this judge trying to cling to maybe like pre-existing local law or something like that to justify what he's doing? Has he made any type of mention of how he interprets the European Convention on this matter?
No. Now, it does become funny when it's kind of stressful when you're involved in it, but it's also funny in that of course at the end of a case you have a court order, and I had a court order which stated I had to go to mass, but he never at the hearing he didn't give any reasons for his decision at all, for any of the decisions in the case. Now, obviously, that's fine. You wait maybe a week or two for a judgment to arrive in the post. Well, nothing arrived. So I got in touch with the court, and they said, yes, it'll be so long. And then I wrote to the court, and this happened several times. And in the end, I had it in writing that it'd be available, and I quote, in days, not weeks. 2 months later, at this point, I'm getting a bit pissed off because obviously I couldn't start an appeal until I had a judgment. I can't argue against a vacuum.
Exactly.
And I had to sue him, the judge, in the High Court to force him to give his reasons, which, when they came, was so bizarre and absurd. I thought they might even be for a different case because they had very little to do with the case I was involved in. But he didn't actually give any reasoning for the churchy stuff at all. No, he didn't refer to it. He did apologise for being late. He said he'd lost all the expert evidence, which I believe, because
the system.
I believe it because his memory of what the expert said was so bizarre. But I can't go into all that. But it was strange. But he didn't actually give a reason, so I still haven't got a reason to argue with. I'm arguing against a court order, not a judgment. I don't have any reasoning.
Wow.
And the only judgment I've got is the one from the one before Christmas, which was too small an infringement. And that's the only explanation I have.
So the most crucial aspect of the decision, and he doesn't even address it in the ruling or the
well, of course, to me, that isn't the most crucial aspect of the decision. I mean, this was a case about how my family would be living their lives. So this wasn't, and still isn't, the most important thing. Mm-hmm. It's not the most important thing in my life. It's not the most important thing in my legal life. It's not the most important thing in my family life. But as far as my human rights and religious feelings are, this is obviously the point which we're talking about and has become general knowledge now. But you know, the case wasn't about church. My ex-wife never asked for it. She didn't bring up. No one in the case brought up the religion of the children or how they would practice their belief, if any. It just didn't happen that way. So
that really makes it bizarre because you could see it if, like, he had heard, it still wouldn't be an excuse, but if he had heard maybe the children were brought up Catholic, then he interviewed the children, you know.
Sure. I can imagine a case where she was saying he has to be brought up Muslim, and I'm saying he has to be brought up Jewish, and I could see the judge being forced to actually say something about how this child was going to spend some of their days. I could see how a judge could be cornered into having to do something like that. But this wasn't this case. This was a case where the mother never said anything about the future for religion, and the father never said anything about the future for religion. The judge did it completely off his own bat.
That is so bizarre. So did he just go on the kind of the fact that, if I read the article correctly, that your ex used to be Catholic or was born Catholic or something like that, or?
I don't think any of that even happened. I think it was simply he told a couple of anecdotes about his Catholic faith. Christmas came up, and he said, "Oh yes, Christmas. Okay, we'll sort out Christmas." And he said that I had to take. She doesn't have to take him to mass, by the way. She hasn't got to.
It's so strange.
Only I have to. I guess he just took it for granted she would. But as far as I know, she doesn't. We never did in the past. So, you know, like I say, it is rather bizarre.
So he may not even have known that she had a history.
I think it came up. I think he knew that she had a Catholic history. I think he had reason to believe that. But that's very different from her asking for something or her lawyer asking for something with a religious aspect to it. It was not requested by either side. Neither of us gave a damn about Catholic Mass.
Right.
It was not her concern and it wasn't my concern. And, you know, it wasn't on our radar.
And something I meant to, I made a note of it that I meant to talk to you about, having some experience with it myself, was I think, there's this bizarre idea among religious people that you hear a lot that religion is necessary for moral instruction, or,
Number 6.
yeah, or either exactly.
Number 6 most offensive thing is that religion gives you morals, and a lack of religion can't give you morals. Honestly,
Yeah, and sometimes
you despair, don't you?
Yeah, we probably even know people like peers who are kind of lukewarm when it comes to religion and don't even really practice themselves, but they indoctrinate the children into it just because they think they're doing right by the kids because the kids need some moral instruction. And I'm thinking, I have two arguments against this. One is, you can probably guess, as kind of a scientifically minded non-believer, I believe that morality is at least partly evolutionary. Well, I think we're a mixed bag. I think we're wired to be tribal and violent, and we're also wired for empathy and compassion. We're social
internally caring and externally aggressive. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another problem I have with it is there might be some validity to the idea that you can learn some you can gain some moral reinforcement from religion. But ironically, for me, born and raised Catholic, forced to undergo Catholic education until probably my mid going into late teens, I really didn't get any of my morality from Catholicism. The only religion I got any morality from was when I was kind of in a seeker phase, when I was closing the book on the idea of a personal God. I studied Eastern religion for a while, and I became influenced by the idea of compassion and reverence for all life that's found in Eastern religions like Buddhism. And that I still carry that with me. But all I can remember of my Catholic upbringing is the indoctrination, the superstition, and the dogma. When I did something bad as a kid, I felt bad probably out of some innate moral sense, and also because I was afraid what my parents would think.
Sure. Look. The offences of the father are carried to the son. The tribe that is in the land you want to go into can be massacred and the babies cut out of their wombs.
Right.
People who are religious, Christians, for example, can be moral, but they're moral despite their religion, not because of it.
I think it was Christopher Hitchens used to say, we don't get our morality from religion. Religion gets its morality from us, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah, and I'll add the word sometimes.
Sometimes, that's right. Well, it probably gets its bad bits from us, too, and anything good it's getting from us as well.
But isn't that, I mean, I look at Christianity a lot because it's the religion that most affects me. It's mostly around me, and I guess that's why I turn to it. But the whole premise of Christianity, the one that people want to try and, it's the dirty little secret of Christianity, in this country anyway, is the crimes of the father visited upon the son. That's ultimately what Christianity relies upon. That's that whole thing about the broken society. The reason why children can die of cancer is that the argument you gave me earlier, because we're in a fallen society,
right,
rests upon the principle that the innocent child suffers because of the crimes of the father. Just as Jesus got crucified for all of our sins. Bollocks.
That's the really bizarre thing, and I'm far from the first person to point this out, but there are some Christians who are sensible enough to think that a lot of the Old Testament miracles are simply parables or fables, but they still believe in the resurrection. But it seems to me that in most strains of Christianity, the point of the resurrection, or the point of the death and resurrection, is to redeem the world from the fall in the garden. So if you don't believe that the fall in the garden was actually happened, what was the death and resurrection all about?
Well, this is what I find hard to understand about, if you like, Church of England type wishy-washy Christians, is I can see the attraction of the idea that there was a good guy that knocked around 2,000 years ago and had a bit of a hard time. I can see the attraction of this guy who talked of love and turning the other cheek, and we'll try and forget about the sell your clothes and bring a sword and that sort of. Even if we clean him up. Totally clean him up, which they do anyway, and they clean out all the stuff we don't like. all the bits that are look, Samaritans are such disgusting people that I'll point this one out because he wasn't.
Yeah, that's true. The Good Samaritan.
Even if we really, really tidy up Christianity and make it really nice and moral, you have to say, well, what's the point? Because the whole point of it is redemption through sacrifice. Sacrifice, not of the person who committed the crime.
The vicarious redemption, as Hitchens used to call it.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't get much closer to an evil philosophy than that, can you?
It's very, so you don't have to take account for your own wrongdoings. This one guy's going to redeem your sins for you. He's basically acting as a stand-in for an Old Testament scapegoat. Where
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But then we're still dirty, fallen, and sinful despite all that, so something didn't stick.
Absolutely. You can't get much more guilty than a Catholic, do you?
That's absolutely. Even though I'm a non-believer, as I alluded to earlier, I'm still carrying some of that baggage around.
I'm from London. I spent most of my life in the north of England, and you'd say you can't get the Cockney out of the Londoner. We can't get you'd find it's hard to get the guilt out of the Catholic, to be honest, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's still something I wrestle with to some degree. It's funny. I remember there probably was a time when I was a teenager that I resented God for not existing, as paradoxical as that sounds. And now, even though I don't literally believe in any of the supernatural claims of Catholicism, I'm still carrying around some Catholic guilt. The whole thing is very bizarre, but obviously from a psychological standpoint, it makes perfect sense if you indoctrinate a child at a young age.
And it seems to affect women more than men.
That could be. I was mentioning that woman that Dawkins was talking to, who now helps other people recovering from religious upbringings, and how she still carries around a lot of the baggage about the doctrine of hell and all of that.
And I think the key here is, it seems to me that if you take my premise that once you have some spirit deities type stuff, then you'll get some dodgy people who will try and take advantage of that and create a power base for themselves. There's nothing easier and better to cripple the rest of the population with than sex.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, Catholicism is great on when it comes to sexual guilt. They have the patent on it. But it's fun. But when you talk about power, in the name of religion, I mean, Catholicism, and I'm not just saying this to try to, be a grinchy atheist and slam on Catholicism, but I think a lot of honest-minded Catholics, probably asked themselves this at one point. If Jesus taught about, social justice, about the difficulty of it's more difficult for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven than a camel to pass through the eye of the needle. And
then we've got to talk about the history of gates and stuff.
And it's like, why does the church need all of these gilded treasures? Why do they need these palaces and all this finery and all this wealth? And
it's not even that it looks good anymore, does it? I mean, maybe 50 years ago, maybe it looked okay, but now it's just gaudy and horrible, isn't it?
Gaudy. And if you go back, I mean, some centuries ago when we had the Borgias and the Medicis, and you had popes living with their illegitimate children in tow or whatever, and it's just obviously paid indulgences, and the list goes on. I think, unfortunately, I hate to say it as someone who maybe, even though I'm an atheist, still likes some of the trappings of Catholicism. It's hard to argue against just how incongruous the papacy is with this humble idea of what Christianity is supposed to be at heart.
The hypocrisy is appalling, isn't it? And it's weird because I speak sitting as I am inside a building built by Catholics for Catholics. This is a very old religious building I live in.
Oh, wow.
And there was no Protestantism. When this was built, there was no Protestantism. There was no America.
So that's old. That is old, yeah.
Yeah, and it's rather weird. It's one of those places that I could. It's very. it's probably just what you imagine. It's all stone and dark, and I'm lonely on the moors in the middle of nowhere, and the wind howls, and it'd be a great setting for a film. And I've never ever. I mean, if the pig escapes, I have to go out in the dark, and the torch isn't working, and you could imagine a scenario where that would be creepy. But I've never ever got the creeps because I think I'm fairly immune to it now. It's all crap, isn't it? I mean, there is just me, the cat, and the pig.
Well, that's fine, and I think that's evolutionary too. There's probably some evolutionary advantage or reason why we're afraid of things that go bump in the night, because you don't want to be eaten or killed by real predators or whatever. But it is funny because I try to be honest with myself about my own kind of contradictions or times in my life when superstition will kind of rear its head despite my reason-based outlook. And I remember when I was a little kid, probably like not even 13 yet, or maybe in between like 8 and 12 or something, my whole family was sitting around and The Exorcist was on TV. And I remember my father...
How many children have been messed up by that film?
Exactly. And my father, who can usually be this kind of gruff character, once in a while he'd be kind of mischievous and he'd get this kind of, naughty grin on his face. And I remember him looking at me with that grin as I was staring at the TV.
How old were you, Phil?
Probably in between 8 and 12 or something like that. And I'm staring at full-on possession scenes with the rotating head and the crucifix and everything. And so afraid that I couldn't even speak or get off the couch or cover my eyes. And my father looking at me with that mischievous grin.
Was he a proper Catholic?
Yeah. I to this day, my day job, even though I've always been artistic, so I have a degree in graphic design, and this is probably where I really do need a therapist. But for some reason, I'm doing manual labor with my family. Both my parents come from kind of humble, working class origins, and my father built up his own construction business, and to this day, my day job is swinging a hammer with the family business. And both my parents, kind of like old world style Catholics, they've become more progressive politically with age. They probably have kind of left-leaning democratic political outlooks and have become progressively more secular with age. But I had a really kind of old-school Catholic upbringing, where you would, if you brought a heavy metal album into the house, my father would look at the lyrics and try to see it.
This is the weird thing. You're talking a foreign language, because I don't imagine a hardcore Catholic here doing that.
Yeah, because this is really old school stuff. I mean, warning us against you. I had a Sunday school teacher. This is before I was a teenager. We call it elementary school here.
Sure.
It's basically kindergarten to grade 5. And so I was probably in that age range, and I had a Sunday school teacher. She seemed old to me, but in retrospect, she's probably like in her 20s and rather comely looking or whatever.
Sure.
But she was recounting a story about her and some friends using a Ouija board. Ugh. And the Ouija board became demonically possessed, flew around the room and knocked over a Christmas tree.
Yeah, that wasn't true, was it?
No, and I'm planning on writing a book. And I'm incorporating that story into the beginning. And but I remember it stuck with me, and part of me, my budding BS detector went off, and looking back, I'm kind of PO'd at that lady for doing that to small children,
and yet she might have made you an atheist.
In part, perhaps. And I had another anecdote from around the same time when it was like a kindergarten or a first grade teacher. They were trying to be nice in their own bizarre way. And there's a lot of people of Irish descent in New England or in America in general. And like I said, my maternal grandmother was Irish, even though I'm largely Italian. So St. Patrick's Day is a fairly big deal. And the two female teachers told us we were going to get a visit for St. Patty's Day from a real-life leprechaun. But of course, the leprechaun really wasn't going going to come. So they gave us like green tinted milk and some like bland cookies to munch on. The leprechaun, of course, never came, and they ended up blaming it on us, saying that we hadn't been good enough. So it started off. It was supposed to be
that's awful,
isn't it awful? And so that was another
that's
thing.
Pathetic as well. Yeah, I mean, it's not as if you couldn't see it coming, is it?
No, my little BS detector went off then too, but I still, in retrospect, resent that. You know what I mean?
Well, that's really bad though, because it's not only that they tried. I mean, they didn't really believe a leprechaun was going to turn up. I mean, it's not like, you know, all this. And again, it's a very American thing. This what do you call it when you all get whisked away?
The rapture.
The rapture. It's American. We don't have that over here. We just don't have that.
Which really isn't all that Christian traditionally. I think it borrows from one fleeting passage in and I don't know if it's Revelation or one part of the New Testament. A very fleeting part, and they turned it into this whole doctrine.
Sure, but if someone said the rapture's coming next Thursday, like that fella did, and you promised your kids it and it didn't happen, then I can understand how you could. You might have to come up with some excuses, but it's not like they really believed the leprechaun was going to come. How did they get themselves into that corner?
Like, I almost think they were, in a misguided way, they were trying to create like a fun or playful event for the kids, but then they realized you have to say nothing because obviously there's not going to be a leprechaun. You know what I mean? And so they went the explanation they went with was we were bad kids. We did something wrong.
Brilliant.
Where they could have said, "Oh, he got caught up at the last school he was visiting or something." But of course, they shouldn't have been bringing it up at all.
So, just so stupid.
Yeah, so a couple of those things, because I've probably got like 70 pages of a book done, and I include those two anecdotes at the beginning.
What's the line you're taking, Phil, on the book? What's your angle? Is it a personal experience or?
Yeah, I think it's kind of supposed to be a combination of autobiography interspersed with my own philosophy and reasons why I don't believe.
Yeah, my journey. Yeah.
Yeah, and the working title might be kind of pompous. I might end up changing it, but it's basically I was going to call it. Now it just slipped. It was going to be Beyond Religion, Truth Without the search for truth through reason or something like that.
No, that sounds all right. I think I don't know if this title's ever come up anywhere, but I quite like the idea of it. It's got to be. It's no good for me. It's got to be from a converted religious person, and it's from eternity to here.
Oh, that is pretty good. This is all we have. This is the world we have.
Yeah, after having eternity to start with. I mean, like I say, it's no good to me because I never remember having eternity. But it sounds I think it's quite a good title. If anyone wants to nick it off me, they can have it. You know,
that's nice.
As long as I get a free copy. But you know, everyone's got a book. Everyone should write a book.
Absolutely. I had one person who wrote a book. I think it was entitled "Atheism is Winning," and he approached me on Twitter. I didn't know him from Adam, no pun intended, and he asked if I would give his book a review or a shout out on my show. And so I was kind of busy, so I read the introduction, I looked the PDF over that he gave me and got a sense of it, and I basically said it looked like this person was coming from a positive place, and it's a book about advancing an atheism worldview, but it's couched in a kind of warm, friendly kind of way. And apparently he didn't like the way I promoted the book, and he thought that we should talk again before I promote it any further. Then he went on to give me a bunch of pointers about how I should change my show. And I was like, you know what? We can forget this.
Oh, well, I'm glad I've got a few ideas how you...
Yeah. But I was like, honest, come on.
We need, I mean, I think there's a great range of shows. I love the preaching to the converted shows like Cognitive Dissonance, ones that don't care about converting anybody. They know they're not going to convert anyone. They want to have fun between us, which is great. I love Thank God I'm Atheist because that's kind of bouncy and cheerful and it makes me laugh but doesn't make me angry. And for yourself, I've learned a lot. They've been very. Yours are like the documentaries. I get from you a nice package of facts which I might have to sift through other things to get to, such as, like I said, I learned a lot about the church-state separation and what the founding fathers. Not that we should. I'm still confused why we should care what the founding fathers thought, but let's just say that we do.
Well, that goes back to what you said earlier, and this is one of those things you're not supposed to say. This is one of those sacred cows you're not supposed to mess with. The founding fathers are almost literally deified.
Yes,
so
and
it's
you have
considered heretical, almost treasonous.
And you've got a doctrine. You've got a doctrine, which is the Constitution, and
Right.
you've even got a creation story. The boats came over, the pilgrims came over,
Yeah.
and the locals were very happy to see them, brought them some turkeys, and didn't at all get smallpox. And the founding father. It's a nice little story, because again, I miss out on this. We haven't got a creation myth like that. We haven't got the founding fathers of our country. It's more of a complicated, very long mishmash.
Saxon influence and the Romans coming over.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, I'm guessing that pretty much all the kids in America roughly get the same story.
Yeah, and it's funny that it takes kind of digging around on your own to get the truth about the founding fathers and how deistic and secular they actually are. And I think it's kind of funny because, I'd like to consider myself kind of politically independent, but I admittedly lean heavily left on a lot of social issues, like whether it's legalizing marijuana, gay rights, LGBT rights, things like that, separation of church and state. But it's funny because the people who wrap themselves in the flag, the Christians, the Christian right, are the ones who try to lay claim to the founding fathers. And ironically, it turns out that as far as their outlook on the world, the founding fathers probably have more in common with my worldview than the worldview of a fundamentalist Christian or even a run-of-the-mill Christian.
Sure. Well, I actually really enjoyed that episode. But the trouble is, I mean, coming from the outside, I had the very basic facts, and I was that was very helpful to me to understand what the founding fathers, in their own words, as you put it, said. Mm-hmm. Not that it really matters, but see, if we are going to have a religion, it's not a bad one to have.
Yeah, that's true.
Founding fatherism, I mean, that's okay, as they go.
As long as people realize that it should be a secular religion of sorts, and just how secular those founders they're deifying were.
Sure.
And I think it's funny because I heard Eddie Tabash, that atheist constitutional lawyer I was talking about. He actually, and I hadn't watched these videos before making that episode. I watched them afterwards, but he had recited some of those same founding fathers quotes that I did, and one of them that is just so brilliant. The Thomas Jefferson one that says something, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something about in the future, the genesis of Jesus in the womb of a virgin by a supernatural father will seem as much a fable as the genesis of Minerva in the head of Jupiter.
Yes.
And that's basically, you have the parallels between the Greek and Roman myths, and that's basically Athena busting fully formed from the head of Zeus.
Sure.
And if the average Christian is capable of grasping what that quote means, it's
sure.
Jefferson saying it's mythology.
I think there's a fairly well-known trope. What would Jesus say if he came back now? But I imagine, what would the founding fathers say if they came back now? Would they be gutted?
Probably.
Sorry, gutted means the same to you as me.
Devastated, perhaps, or
disappointed.
Yeah. Right.
I wonder, what they would think.
I've thought about that too, especially after doing that episode. And Thomas Jefferson. I mean, Jefferson or Paine, especially, but even some of the ones who were more sympathetic with religion, like Franklin or John Adams. I'm trying to imagine the look on their face if they saw Ken Ham's Creation Museum, or saw a poster for.
And I imagine one of them turning around and saying, "I didn't mean machine guns."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's another kind of sacred cow that you're not supposed to touch. If you say anything critical of the right to bear arms, you're a hippie, you're treasonous, you're soft. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It's strange, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know why I'm bringing this up, but I think because we're talking about religion versus atheism, now we're talking about guns. I don't know if you guys heard it over on your side of the pond, but there was this really kind of shocking episode that happened this past week where this guy killed 3 young Muslims.
I've heard about it, yes. But I don't know much detail, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it was in I forget what part of the country it's in, but the location is known as Chapel Hill, and it's kind of this college area. And there was 3 young Muslims. There was a dental student and his wife. They were newlyweds, and then the wife's sister. And by all accounts, they were these great young people. They're probably in their very early 20s, and these are people who were giving time to charities and offering dental services to the homeless and things like that. And there was this guy with a chip on his shoulder who lived near them, and now people are trying to suss out if it was a hate crime or if it's really what seemed on face value, that the guy had a chip on his shoulder towards his neighbors in general, and he would argue about parking spaces, and if the neighbors were too loud or if you parked in the wrong spot of the complex, he would come to your door displaying a gun on his belt and kind of lay into you. And supposedly there was some kind of just ongoing dispute over a parking spot. And anyway, he ended up shooting last week these 3 young Muslims in the head, and then he turned himself into the police. And so everyone off the bat is thinking, this is probably some right-wing gun nut. That's what everyone thought. And it turned out, and I'm like, oh no. I'm like clutching.
He wasn't an atheist, was he?
He was an atheist. Yeah, he was an atheist. And not only an atheist, but he had progressive views about gay rights and stuff.
Well, it doesn't matter, of course.
Of course.
It shouldn't matter.
It shouldn't matter, but the only thing that bothered me about it is that obviously, this is going to be like throwing red meat to the opposition. And even though it logically doesn't make any sense because atheism isn't a belief, it's a lack of belief.
You understand that if it was here, that wouldn't have been even mentioned.
Yeah, and even like a liberal news source like the Huffington Post, and the headline, it said Chapel Hill shooter shared atheist beliefs.
Here it would not even be mentioned because it's so irrelevant. I don't believe anyone would mention it. Even the Daily Mail or whatever you're thinking of, it wouldn't occur to us.
It would just be the fact that 3 people were murdered. Right?
Yeah, it's off our radar. We would talk about Islam. We would talk about how this guy had a gun. We would talk about all sorts of things, but we wouldn't. I don't think it'd occur to us to even refer to his belief because it's normal, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's and there's kind of a meme that people on the left like to throw around, like whenever someone with a gun kills someone now. It's a play on, I think it's Wayne LaPierre, the head of the National Rifle Association. He would say that what every situation needs is not a lack of guns. It needs a good guy with a gun. Yeah. So whenever there's a bad guy with a gun, the only thing you need to solve the problem is a good guy with a gun. So whenever someone gets killed now, people on the left will say, where was the good guy with the gun? Or they'll say, oh, just another good guy with a gun. And of course, now people on the right are saying, just another lefty with a gun or something like that. So it's already turned into fuel for a pissing match. Well,
I was quite pleased when that Christian statue, whatever it was, got hit by a car. I was quite pleased that turned out to be a Christian that did it.
A Christian I don't even think I'm familiar with that. A Christian.
There was some Christian monument that had been the topic of some argument. The normal sort of argument: should we have a Christian thing? I think it may have been the Ten Commandments. It's normal sort of argument. Should we have the Ten Commandments outside this courtroom or whatever, and someone crashed their car into it and smashed it up.
Oh,
But
well,
it turned out to be a crazy Christian.
yeah, I'm not even familiar with that, but I know there is a really long-standing controversy over whether the Ten Commandments should be displayed outside courthouses, and
And of course it shouldn't.
yeah, because it's obviously a clash of church and state.
And it's
Yeah.
stupid because the whole idea, I mean, the idea that God wrote the Constitution, stupid. The idea that your laws represent the codification of the Ten Commandments, stupid. I mean, it's hard to find anything more ridiculous than to try and force American law onto the Ten Commandments. It's ridiculous. Most of them are completely irrelevant.
I was just going to say that, as a lot of people have pointed out, the first few are really just about
Ego
trembling before God and paying lip service.
Yeah.
The more universally moralistic ones come later on. Thou shalt not steal, etc.
Well, don't give false evidence. Don't
That's a good
steal.
one.
Don't kill. Isn't that about it?
Well, you reminded me of a fight I got in with my father, which I also mentioned in the book I'm working on. I'm a huge fan, have been since probably maybe my early teen years, or even a little more, or a little before that, of The Doors, the rock band The Doors.
Sure.
And Jim
Great.
Morrison as an individual. By studying Jim Morrison, it's how I discovered to love my literary interests, like Blake.
And light your fire. Yeah.
Huxley, yeah. Like, he was actually literally had a genius IQ, and he was very well read. I found out about poets like Baudelaire and Rimbaud and Blake. I found out about like philosophers like
Sure.
Nietzsche and
These are the sort of people that shouldn't take drugs.
yeah, and my when I was in a band. Actually, I think I'm still in a band. We just don't play anymore. But from an early age, I was in a band, and I was probably like in my late teens or something like that.
This is an atheist thing. This is an atheist podcaster thing. Because I used to be in bands. I played at festivals
really?
and stuff. Yeah, but not only you and me. There's a whole lot of podcasters. I mean, Jake from the Imaginary Friends show produces music on his podcast all the time. There's also the Scathing Atheist. All his music is written by himself. It seems to me to be that maybe it's about if you're going to be into podcasting. Maybe if you're the outgoing podcasting type person, you're also the sort of person that would have picked an instrument up and played live. Maybe just that's it.
I think there is probably a connection there between musical creativity and podcasting and recording, but also it goes to the point earlier that we were talking about, one of those insulting misconceptions about atheists, that we're not spiritual or creative people or something like that. There's a lot of creative atheists out there, but it's funny because
how creative is it? Is it to absorb what you've been taught and regurgitate it out? How creative is that?
To nod your head and toe the line, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny, so my band had been playing too loud, and after they left, my father came upstairs, and he saw that I had a picture of Jim Morrison on like a bookcase, and that there were 2 candles that had been burning there. The candles were out, but in retrospect, I totally get my father's hang up about candles. He's a carpenter,
Catholic.
and he had seen houses that had been partially destroyed by
Oh,
candles.
it was purely practical then.
Yeah, but this is what he said. He looked at the picture of Jim Morrison and he said, "What are you, worshiping Jimmy Dores?" That's what he said to me. And I still laugh because there's a comedian named Jimmy Dore. So whenever I hear the name Jimmy Dore, I think of it. But
As I say, which one of them is Pink?
Pink Floyd. Are you a Pink Floyd fan?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. Which one
by
is
the
Pink?
way, which one's Pink?
Yeah, that's right.
And so I love Pink Floyd too, huge Floyd fan, and so I got into a fight with my not fisticuffs, but I got into a verbal altercation with my father. Yes, about the Ten Commandments, because when my father asked me if I was worshiping quote unquote Jimmy Dores, I kind of angrily, in my angst-ridden young person way, said I don't worship anything. And he tried to say that the Ten Commandments were proof that there must be a God, because how could something so ingenious come about otherwise. And even at that young age, I went into how the Ten Commandments were basically a social contract, a kind of I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, like a set of rules to help keep people
I think
from
you're being
raping and
generous.
killing each other. You know, I mean, the kind of, and we have precedents like the Code of Hammurabi, etc.
Yeah.
I was a little wise ass, and I was always naturally philosophical. So,
Yeah, well, yeah, and all the references in the Ten Commandments to child abuse, to rape, and all that sort of stuff. Oh, hang on a minute. It's not there, is it?
yeah, that's a good point. But the Old Testament
Don't own slaves. That could be a good one.
Yeah, and I love when Christian apologists say, "Well, it was a different kind of slavery."
Ah.
Yeah, but if you read it carefully, and then it kind of contradicts itself. You're not supposed to take Hebrews as slaves, but if you do have fellow Hebrews as
But
slaves,
if you did by accident, yeah.
yeah, then it's like you can let them go after 6 years, but if they love slavery so much, you have to puncture their air with
No,
a
they love their
ball.
family so much.
Yeah, exactly. And if their wife wasn't a slave beforehand, she gets to go free too. But if she was a slave, the master gets to keep her for a while. And I mean, it's just atrocious. It's Bronze Age,
It's the thing
Bronze
is,
Age morality.
if you want to say the Ten Commandments are the basis of our law, or the basis to our morality, or the basis to our social contract, you have to be willingly ignorant. You have to be knowingly avoiding the issues. Because, as you said, most of it's egocentrism anyway. And I've identified, it might be others, but I've only identified 3 half-decent things in there.
That every other society has anyway.
Has them anyway, that's right, yeah. And the idea that before the Ten Commandments, you could go around killing and stealing and with gay abandon,
Exactly.
And talk about gay abandon, there's another funny thing, isn't there? Because there's a new podcast called The Gaytheist. And I'm all for it, but it just points, doesn't it, to the hang-up of religion, sex, because it's irrelevant. Sexuality is completely irrelevant.
Yeah, and that's why I'm still trying to struggle with how I want to term my moral outlook, but for lack of a better term, I kind of, and I'm probably not the first to say this, I'm sure, but create this kind of dichotomy between what I consider to be universal morality, and that's certainly that's long been coined, and then what I call arbitrary morality. And of course, like we already said, morality is a mixed bag. We seem to be wired, as you said, towards, in this kind of xenophobic way, wired for violence and tribalism, and in this kind of endo way, wired for empathy and compassion.
Sure.
But there does seem to be certain universal constants that obviously the world is a messed up place where people using all sorts of excuses to commit barbarous and atrocious acts. But generally speaking, whether it's some mud hut in a rainforest or whether it's in a gigantic metropolis, if you walk up to someone and kill another person for no reason other than you felt like it, people are going to be aghast, And
Sure.
So there are these kind of universal moral precepts, generally speaking. I don't know if there's any such thing as objective morality, but then there's also what I like to call arbitrary morality. There are things that don't involve doing harm to other people. There are things that don't involve saying, that don't involve drawing from empathy and saying, I wouldn't like it if someone did this to me, so I won't do it to them. But there's things like not eating shellfish, not picking up sticks on the Sabbath.
This is a useful dichotomy. There are some blurry parts, but I think it's quite a useful analysis to break down morality into these 2 aspects. One, which we could see a biological potential and therefore genetic codification of the morality, and one where it's so arbitrary, as you put it, that there's no basis upon which that could be codified.
Yeah, and homosexuality falls into that. And the whole thing with Leviticus, killing a man for lying with another man. And I think not like you've been saying, not like these things should matter. We should know better and we should be better. But I think I've heard it explained a couple of times that this might not even necessarily even having to do with an inherent revulsion. for homosexuality. But supposedly the newly monotheistic religion of Judaism, or what would become Judaism, was in competition with pagan, with polytheistic religions
Sure.
that had all these weird gender-bending cultic rituals and practices.
Yeah,
and so
which is hard to control.
Yeah, so it's possible that that kind of injunction against homosexuality might have had something to trying to keep people away from competing religions, but not like it should matter. Our human decency should tell us that if two grown people want to enjoy the company, whether out of lust or love, of someone of the same sex, and we're not being hurt by it, who cares,
Sure. We started off talking about the differences between America and Britain, and here's an area which I think we can apply here, which it is not a new concept, but Fromm, who tried to describe where Nazis came from, basically wrote about the escape from freedom. Things were too free in Germany, and they escaped the freedom to Nazism. Now, I think this is very dodgy and very poor. But at the same time, he talked about two types of freedom: negative freedom and positive freedom. And it seems to me that America has a bit of a love affair with individual freedom or negative freedom, the freedom from the government, the freedom from this and that and the other. And those things are very much enshrined in the Constitution, the freedom from restrictions on speech. Whereas in Europe, we've had, it seems to me, a more collective concept of freedom, as in the freedom to, for example, the freedom to walk into a hospital and obviously
not be killed, or
well, no, to be treated in the hospital, because obviously we've had our individual freedom restricted because they've taken taxes off us, and they pooled it together to give us collective freedom into the hospital. I'm not saying America doesn't have that as well. It may be a slightly different balance. But the reason why I tie this into what you said is we can go back tens of thousands, I think maybe 60 or 80,000 years ago. There is at least one instance of, I think there's many actually, of a human that could not possibly have survived, could not possibly have hunted, could not probably not even have eaten because their teeth were such in a terrible state, without the help of others.
Right.
So to me, this, what you called endo, this inward-looking aspect of humanity, and I do think it's probably humanity. It's not culture. It's probably
innate
got
to the species.
Yeah, genetic component is this desire to care for each other, and it goes back a very long way. And I think we are only. Again, earlier we talked about sending a man to the moon. That you can't do that with individual freedom. You only do that collectively. You can only do that by grouping together and working together in the hundreds of thousands, as it turned out, to achieve something as phenomenal. We forget how phenomenal that was. To achieve something as fantastic as that, and it's a great disappointment that we've really retreated on that front. But anyway,
exactly. Then there was the landing. What was it? The landing on the comet, which took place recently, which was
fantastic. A European thing, of course.
That's right. That's right.
But putting that aside, you're talking about this breaking down the morality to the arbitrary and to the less arbitrary. And I would say that we have evidence going back a very long way that there's an endemic aspect of humanity, which is to care for each other. I think society has to make us walk past the crash site or the fallen person out of fear that they might be to mug us or whatever. We have to be taught not to care for each other. And I would have said that religion has a part to play in this. We've been taught about even what I learned from the Good Samaritan is that all Samaritans are bastards apart from that one. Even in the hidden messages you get behind the one you're told. This is all training, and training takes us away from what's endemic in us, the caring, the beautiful thing about humanity. We touches upon a few things we've talked about. What's fantastic about us is only undermined and demeaned by religion, in my belief.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I was going, and this sounds like maybe this might be unfair, but the bits that are good about religion as I was quoting Hitchens. Religion, we don't get our morality from religion. Religion gets its morality from us. And those are things you find
And I said
culture to
sometimes.
culture. Sometimes, that's right. Well, it's funny. I think you're right. If you look at ancient hominid fossils or whatever, or fossils of, this might sound contradictory, but ancient quote unquote modern man or modern humans.
No, that's absolutely right. Yep.
You can see people who had severe injuries that healed and were most likely because they had support and care from their fellows or whatever. And also, I think, and it's not one or the other. Like I often say, we're a mixed bag, and the same applies for animals. Sometimes Christian apologists might say, well, if we were like animals, we'd be horrible. The animal kingdom is all, nature, red in tooth and claw and everything. But animals are a mixed bag like us. It's true, you can find cannibalism and infanticide and all these things in nature, but also
without a reason. I think there's usually a reason for it, Phil. Mm-hmm. It's only human society that kills on the basis of a war. Well, maybe chimpanzees to a degree do.
Well, they're so much like us, chimpanzees. It's
sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember it was Jane Goodall who I sometimes on the show I'll talk about the dark side of chimpanzees, about how we used to think they were kind of these wise, gentler cousins of ours, and in a lot of ways they are. They share child-raising responsibilities. They groom one another. They seem to comfort one another emotionally and things like that. And but at the same time, it goes to that endo-exo type of thing again, where male chimpanzees in roving bands will chase down lone males from other bands and ravage and beat them to death.
Absolutely.
And this here and there's been some instances of cannibalism and infanticide among chimps, and I think it's no coincidence that they're our closest genetic relative. But I mean, I like to look at things like even a crocodile, which is considered almost like this cold-blooded killing machine, that the same jaws it will use to do like a death roll and tear flesh, it will respond to the chirping of its hatchlings and guide them gently into the water. And I think the maternal instinct, which is so evident, at least in mammals and in other animals too, is a fine example of kind of proto-morality or something like that. And there's animals like monkeys and meerkats that, even though they're putting themselves at risk, will set off a vocal alarm when they
look out for each other,
a predator. So, it's I think we can basically see the roots of morality in what scientists call proto-ethics and animal altruism and
absolutely.
Like that.
So again, I would say if you rather like the spirit deities, you have another mechanism which is ripe for corruption. This might be something that I think about. I guess I do think about a lot. But once you have structure in society, there is scope for someone to get their teeth into it. And again, once you see this kind of morality, there's also the ability to play on that morality. I'll give you an example. I'm trying to think of a good one, but there are various examples of animals pretending to be a different kind of animal for a malevolent purpose. The one doesn't come to mind.
Well, I'm thinking I know there's certain octopi or whatever that will camouflage themselves and wait till an animal passes over them. There's a lot of animals like that will use camouflage to lie in wait. What's that spider? I forget what they call it.
The trapdoor spider.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think maybe we're straying a little bit. But I mean, I think along the lines of again, we have something in human nature which gives scope for someone to use it to their advantage. Once you have morality towards each other, you have an opening for someone to create a religion out of those morality, out of those ideas, and I would say corrupt those ideas, to drag them from what they were, to convert them into what you call arbitrary morality, because it's available to be perverted, isn't it?
You know, it's funny. Once I got the gist of what you were saying, what jumped to my mind, I don't know if this is an apt example or if we're on the same page, but I thought of Jim Jones and his Jonestown cult. How he started off as being this kind of social justice Christian and ended up amassing more and more power and exerting more and more control until you ended up with a mass suicide.
Yes.
And partially mass murder, because some of the people were killed at gunpoint, and some people were forced to drink the poison Kool-Aid. Kind of a ghoulish example, hopefully not.
No, I think it is quite apt in a way. I mean, a religion, to me, a religion is only a cult that's grown up. Frankly, I mean, all religions, you know,
they all start off as cults.
Sure, and what are these cults? I mean, what? Okay, we can't go back 2,000. I wish I could go back and watch what happened 2,000 years ago.
Me too.
I wish I could go back 10,000. All these different times I'd have to go back to. We can't do that. All we can do is look at the modern parallels. And what do we see over and over again? We see an individual who is usually quite controlling, who builds a circle around themselves, who very early on, very often starts controlling sexuality. Right, I get back to that. It's a primal thing. It's once you've got your hands on that, you've got your hands on people by the balls.
Joseph Smith.
Over and over, absolutely. And just recently, there was a guy. I forget the story, but it came up in the usual sources. A cult leader who was basically saying that no one in this actually it was a church or something. It was a church, a Christian church, and the head man, a pastor, I think you'd call him over there, was saying, it was preventing them having sex with each other. It was not allowing them to have children. Was institutionalizing abortion, I think. And obviously it's not going to last very long, that particular religion, because it's got a pretty poor chance of reproducing itself.
Right.
But the modern parallels show you over and over again. You get an individual who concentrates power, controls sexuality, and manipulates people. And unless someone's going to turn to me and saying all these people were separately and individually inspired by God, I think we have perfect examples of how religions are created. But an opportunity to manipulate people, to pervert their real endemic morality, the stuff you're talking about, to pervert it into arbitrary morality, again, to use your definition, in order to control people. And it seems to be over and over again about sex.
Yeah, it always starts off with some kind of charismatic figure, and they usually end up being a deeply morally flawed individual when all is said and done. And I'm thinking about, for some reason, it's kind of comical, but Joseph Smith and Mormonism popped up. Because then
Heaven's Gate, you could
Heaven's Gate.
There's loads of them.
And it's funny, Heaven's Gate wasn't as lascivious as some of the others, where sometimes the leader will use sexual control to enjoy himself sexually with other members of the cult, whereas Heaven's Gate, he basically denied them sexuality, or basically denied them sexual indulgence, where I think the males were instructed to castrate themselves, or either that, they might have flown to, they flew to some other country to be surgically castrated or something like that. But yeah, you're so right. It usually starts off with a charismatic figure who goes power mad, and it usually has something to do with sexuality. And then of course there was what was it? There was Waco. Yep. I can't believe it just slipped my mind. Oh, the Branch Davidians, David Koresh. There's another example where he was almost trying to be like a biblical King David, where he got to enjoy his pick of the females or whatever. Yeah,
it happens over and over again. And I like I say, these are case studies. We can't go back in time. The only way we can analyse it is by looking at modern parallels. If you want to look at a primitive, and I hate to use the word, but primitive, our society, you look at a society that lived in the same sort of conditions as the primitive society of ours. You go back, you have to use modern parallels. And Like I say, you have these examples over and over again, and also part of the mechanism which works repeatedly. This is from psychology. There's, I won't bother going into the technical detail, but the idea is commitment. Once you've committed yourself a certain amount, it's a darn sight easier to carry on committing than to admit to yourself that you've just given away all your stuff or castrated yourself, for God's sake. Right?
That's
and
right.
you were wrong. I mean, walk back from that one, man. Walk back and say, okay, I was wrong. Now, can I have my bollocks back? And now can I also have my money back? It's not going to happen, is it? So, so it's called commitment theory for a reason. And it's true in scams, money scams. It's used in advertising. It's used in all sorts of different ways. This idea that once you commit yourself past a certain level, the more you sacrifice, where it should be easier to dump it because you realise this is just, it can't be true if I've got to give all this stuff away. The opposite, in fact, happens. It's rather like putting a high price on something. If you charge double for the Rolls Royce, you think the Rolls Royce must be worth having.
Yeah, that's so right. And what was I going to say? Yeah, and I think that I've never heard of that before, and I'm very thankful you brought it up, commitment theory.
Sure.
And,
I'll give you a very, very slimmed down version of it.
That's a good point, because I think, it's probably like a bouillabaisse. There's probably other factors like suspension of disbelief and things like that. But
okay, it's a way of getting through cognitive dissonance to a degree is commitment. Because you're so committed, the dissonance doesn't drive you to give up X.
And that makes me think about like Scientology, when we have some of these
absolutely
like Hollywood big shots that must know the truth about L. Ron Hubbard, that he started off as he was literally a science fiction author.
Sure.
And that...
really prolific, too.
Yeah, and how... and just these really mundane facts. Like, I think originally he wanted Scientology to almost be like a kind of psychology. But sure. I think the actual like mainstream psychology didn't want him, and he ended up going with a church status. I think largely for tax reasons.
Absolutely.
And then we end up with this built-in animosity or resentment of mainstream psychology or psychiatry within Scientology. And then we know that, and this used to be carefully guarded stuff, but now with the internet, anyone who has access to Google can find it out, that the higher you advance in levels within Scientology, eventually you learn the whole kind of bizarre creation mythos about Lord Xenu, the spaceships and the atom bombs.
Well, it's too late by then. I mean, forget commitment. There's something called psychological accounting, which is when you value something because of the price. Again, to put it very simply, like that the Rolls Royce is worth a lot because it costs a lot. That's kind of psychological accounting, which is a branch of commitment theory. But think of commitment theory in a more general sense. For your Hollywood stars, once you've got 10 million, who cares, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say you've got 100 million and you give 90 million to the whatever cult. Frankly, it doesn't really matter to your life that much. Not really. Once you reach the first few million, there's not much more you can get. The odd helicopter or whatever. You
can still live in luxury easily.
Yeah, exactly. Right? But these people have made a public commitment. For them, it's a face-saving thing. That for them to walk out of their religion, it's going to be really hard because they're going to have to say to the public, I was wrong. I was stupid. I was mugged. And it's not the money. It's the admitting I was mugged.
And then some of them have been in it for so long that there's also, you have to come to grips with the fact that you wasted, 15 or 20 years of your life, or however long it was.
Again, Phil, we shouldn't bring my marriage into this.
Yeah. Hopefully it wasn't as bad as Scientology, but you weren't
I'll never know.
Well, I feel bad for the suckers in the Sea Org. They have that special branch that they call the Sea Org, short for Sea Organization or something like that. And there's people who basically for slave wages are forced to clean like Tom Cruise's boat or something like that.
Yeah, but hang on a minute. Is that so different from the Mormon paying for their own mission?
Right. Well, Mormonism is another one. I'd put Mormonism and Scientology into the same basket in a sense, in that
Sure, modern.
And Sam, I remember. I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast, The Young Turks, hosted by Cenk Uygur. But
I've seen bits, and when something's come up, I've seen the clips.
Yeah, it's an online news show, and I'm actually a fan. But for a while, there was some tension because after that whole fallout where Ben Affleck clashed with Sam Harris.
Yep.
And Sam Harris was being accused of being Islamophobic, etc. The Young Turks, who also many of the hosts are openly atheist, agnostic, they sided with Ben Affleck, kind of.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting but cringe-inducing watch. Sam Harris went on the Young Turks and did a 3-hour kind of contentious interview. And one of the things they were arguing over is that Sam Harris was saying that it's kind of more ridiculous to believe in younger or newer religions like Mormonism and Scientology than to believe in the ancient ones, whereas Cenk Uygur was saying that they're all equally
objectively, yes.
They're all equally ridiculous. But I side with Sam Harris in the fact that the Abrahamic faiths go so far back into the mists of time and are so far removed from us, and we know so little about their formation.
You can put some excuses in there, can't you?
Yeah, there's a little patina of validity, or like they've been grandfathered in a little, even though you and I obviously don't believe in the faith claims. But something like, we know L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction author. We know he went with the church status because we know he went with the church designation for the tax status.
It's an easier debunk, isn't it? That's what it is.
We know that Joseph Smith claimed that he found golden plates inscribed with a language called Reformed Egyptian, where Egyptologists tell us doesn't exist.
Yeah,
and we know that Native Americans are an indigenous people that have nothing in common with ancient Israelites.
Yes.
You know, so it's like it's easier to see the BS factor with newer religions, I think.
Absolutely. Yes, it's telegraphed, isn't it? It's obvious. And I guess logically it's quite obvious that some of the stuff in the Bible or the Quran or whatever is crap. But you can there's grey areas and fudges, and you can say and there's room for you to say yes, but it might mean this, and you haven't got the room in a relatively modern writer.
Right. We have like Joseph Smith's arrest records and and all stuff like that. But Jesus, I'm 99.9% probably pretty safe saying he didn't walk on water or raise the dead. But we weren't there 2,000 years ago, so So
and more to the point, we don't know what the writers were trying to convey when they said that. So there may be
how figurative were they being?
And it was being translated 3 times. Maybe we haven't quite got the meaning quite exactly. There's fudge area, isn't there? There's room for maneuver.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I think you. While I was reading the article, it said that you come from a Unitarian background.
No.
That's false too.
No, it's not wrong. It's just the last church I went to was the Unitarian church.
Okay. Because I was going to ask you, because I think some of the founding, like Washington was something like, had an association with Unitarianism and then Episcopalianism. Now, do Unitarians, are they an example of Christians who reject some of those supernatural elements like the virgin birth and things like that?
I think they're a soft landing.
So what do you mean by the kind of a mushy kind of approach to it?
No, I mean a soft landing, as in if you jump off a tower block, you want a soft landing, not a hard landing, right? If you jump away from religion, you quite want a soft landing rather. If I was going to recommend a podcast for the fresh, new atheist who just rejected religion, I would not be say, why don't you tune into cognitive dissonance? Right. That would not be my first point of call. I would find them something much softer landing than that.
Like something, a friendly agnostic or something like that.
Yeah, something gentle to not scare them off. And I'm not knocking Cecil or Tom, by the way, because I love what they do, but they freely admit they're preaching to the choir. Mm-hmm. They're not there to convert anyone. So, like I say, I think that to me, I think from my limited experience of Unitarianism, which is very limited, it's a soft landing for people who are in training to be atheists.
I gotcha. That's funny.
That's just how I see it. I mean, like I say, I only went a couple of times. It was just something I wanted to dip my toe into. There was no belief involved. So that's my last church experience was Unitarian.
Well, that's funny because that's kind of like me. Like I mentioned how I dabbled with Eastern religion, even though I don't believe in some of the supernatural trappings of Eastern religion any more than I believe in the supernatural claims of the Abrahamic faiths. I've integrated some of the teachings about compassion and stuff, and the usefulness of meditation and things like that. But
Sure.
I sometimes half jokingly refer to Buddhism, how it was like training whales for atheism to me, for me, because even though Buddhism's the daughter religion of Hinduism, kind of like Christianity is the daughter religion of Judaism.
Sure.
And Hinduism has a plethora of gods. Buddhism is kind of agnostic on God. It doesn't really care about the gods. It's all about trying to find your own liberation, basically through the annihilation of the ego.
Yes.
And it kind of shows you that you don't need to have belief in a creator God to have a sense of quote unquote spirituality.
It's one of those things, isn't it, Phil? It's the Western Buddhism, the Buddhism over here, if you like, or over there for you, is that kind of rather nice, be at peace with everything oneness. But I guess if you're in the wrong country where the Buddhists are fighting whoever else, I guess it's one of those things, isn't it? It's
South Asia, where recently there's been Buddhists decapitating people.
Sure.
And I think even was it like I don't know if it's the Tamil Tigers or whatever, but there's some violent Buddhist elements in different organizations and conflicts, unfortunately.
Sure, I think that Hitchin says religion poisons everything. Well, I'm not sure whether I'd use that phrase myself, but I think it empowers poisoning. It gives its legs. It gives you a reason to do terrible things.
Well, yeah, that's funny because the way I often talk about that too, and the way I talk about it as a kind of accelerant. Like I remember watching an interview with the American horror novelist Stephen King.
Oh, yeah.
And he was talking about how, kind of similar to certain rock musicians like Marilyn Manson, he had been accused of creating works that supposedly led young people to commit acts of violence. Like I think he had a short story that had to do with school violence or something like that. And he said something like, I don't think that a Marilyn Manson record or a Stephen King novel can make someone kill someone, but it can work as something of an accelerant. And I think that's true with religion, where, like we were saying a couple of times, humans are partially naturally tribalistic. So even if there was no religion, people would probably still fight over land and resources,
and football.
whatever. Yeah, and football. But religion certainly does act as an accelerant.
It's an enabler, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the ultimate excuse. And because it's so vague and you can draw whatever you want from it, you can excuse anything with it. Anything, absolutely. I can't think of anything you can't excuse with a passage from the Bible, for example.
Yeah, and it does work as an accelerant, and it gets to a point where it gets blurry. It's hard to suss out where does religion end and the political motivations begin. But certainly, we look at some stuff like Boko Haram right now and ISIS, some very ugly stuff. And,
yes, don't tell me that story again.
Oh, geez, that's
I think it's worse secondhand through Phil Abelli.
Probably, yeah.
I still haven't watched it live, man. I'm not going to either.
The burning of the.
But sometimes I wonder whether it's better to watch it than to think it.
Right. What I put in your imagination wasn't worse than the actual.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that.
I'll try not to describe it again, but I'll say
no, it's fine.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
It's so bad it sticks with you. It's pretty nasty stuff. And it was kind of strange how if you did some people were saying that video was hard to find, but when I did a search for it, the first thing that came up was Fox News.
Yeah, Fox News streamed it. Yeah,
yeah, and Fox News caught a lot of flack because people were comparing it to torture porn, etc. Did you need to leave in the 20 minutes where it's just people speaking in Arabic or whatever? But I would argue at least that kind of cushions you. It gives you time to brace yourself.
There's a program over here which you probably never heard of. And the name escapes me, but there was they brought up a fantastic point. They showed other Fox News videos, which was of a nudist beach, and they covered all the private parts of the people on the beach with black squares. And the question was, what's going to happen if ISIS want to murder someone naked? Because they're going to implode in an internal problem of where to put the black squares. Because it's not disgusting to watch someone die horribly, but it is disgusting to show someone's knob.
That is so true, and that goes into that weird kind of repressed Christian.
Oh, into sex again.
Yeah, it's like God made the body, so it's supposed to be beautiful. It's a divine creation, but it's dirty, repulsive, and disgusting, and how dare you show it.
And that's how we control you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is true. You can't show nudity, but you can show the flesh melting off someone's skull, and there I just put part of the
Thank
video
you.
back in your head.
Thank you for that.
I feel bad laughing about it because that guy must.
No,
have
you have to. What other choice have you got?
Kind of like gallows humor, I guess. Yeah.
You've got no other choice. I mean, as you know, I've experienced some extreme situations deliberately. Put myself into situations. I'm not pretending it was I was an innocent party drawn in unwillingly, but I put myself into these difficult situations. I've met the most famous killers in this country that were alive, because we don't bang people up permanently. The prison culture in this country, we don't have as much. We do have a bit of it. We're not as good as I'd like us to be, but you have a very punitive legal system, don't you?
Oh yeah, I mean, we still have capital punishment.
Sure.
I know, and supposedly. And I have, I won't even go into my views on capital punishment. I think mine might be, I think we should err on the side of caution and be better to get rid of it at the risk of putting an innocent person to death. And there's already been cases where barely in the nick of time, DNA evidence has saved people.
And often after the nick of time.
Yeah, exactly. But then there's
But park all that aside, over here, if I'm going to meet someone who's never going to get out of prison,
right?
These aren't offenders like you might have in America who won't see the light of day again. In this country, if you're never going to be out of prison, that means you are one of the worst people in this country.
Okay, like some kind of crazy serial killer or something.
Yeah, yes, they're the people I met. Because by definition, if I want to meet someone who could never get... Because if the extremity of the extreme situation isn't extreme, if you can perceive yourself coming out of prison again.
Now, this actually fascinates me because I assume you're doing it for some reason as part of your career as a psychologist or out of curiosity, scientific curiosity as a psychologist. It reminds me of I've seen videos of similar situations of psychologists here in America or like forensic psychologists interviewing serial killers. And if you can ever look it up, I forget the name of the doctor, but there's a psychologist who interviews a killer, a hitman, who used to go by the moniker of the Iceman. And he was just a complete psychopath who used to work for the mob, but he was beyond a mob hitman. This is a guy who loved what he did. It's
good to enjoy your work.
Yeah, I mean, a guy who happily recounts how the first time he killed someone, he just drove up. He was in a car and just happened to pull up beside, like, I think might have been a random car, or if I don't know if it was one of his hits, and blew apart a guy's face with a shotgun. And he used to tie people up, leave them in a cave with rats, and leave a camera going, and would record the rats eating people alive. And the
cheerful soul, wasn't he?
Yeah, and the psychologist who was interviewing the guy was at times intentionally pushing his buttons to get a reaction, and you
I
could
did
see
that
the
once, I
guy
remember.
getting mad. And I think the guy's last name was Kuklinski, and he used to be called the Iceman. So if people want
Okay.
to look this crap
I
up
might
on,
look,
on HBO, no, it was on HBO, I think. But if people want to look it up on YouTube, it's probably somewhere. But so was that kind of like you, and kind of in the
Yeah.
role of a psychologist, you were interviewing
Yeah.
these people?
My interest, it's kind of stupid as well, because I kind of believe I can't achieve it. It's a kind of a search for authenticity. It's a search for what really a human really is. Mm-hmm. And the like I said, we've talked about religion, but there's many other mechanisms as well which build up this kind of onion of skins, of layers of societal impressions and various complexities that prevent us having access to what a human really is. And if I want to know what a human really is, I need to see those shells come off. And for me, the extreme situation, such as never coming out of prison again, or facing death in a war, and many other situations that you could think of, in extremis, the idea is that a lot of those social conventions will not exactly peel away, but they'll be a little bit exposed, and we might get a little bit underneath and reveal more about the state, the human condition. So to me, never coming out of prison again takes away the whole idea of being able to perceive yourself in the future, and the dying man isn't able to perceive themselves in the future. And so these situations are interesting to me as a not in themselves, but as a mechanism for unlocking humanity.
And that's a great point, because someone who has no chance of ever getting out of prison has no reason to bluff or hide. They can be their monstrous self in a way. And by analyzing the extreme, you can get a better sense of what people on the spectrum are capable of.
Yes. There was a guy, I was with someone who had killed, and like I say, for me to meet someone who never going to come out again, they won't have killed once, they'll have killed several times at least. Because like I say, because in our system, people do have a chance of coming out again. And I believe, generally speaking, rightly so. But that's another argument. Anyway, this guy was very interesting to me. And because even in that extreme situation where he couldn't perceive himself out in society again, he couldn't perceive himself with all the societal stuff that we all take for granted. He only had the prison system to live in. Mm-hmm. And I had stuff on the table. And he sat there and he ordered it all nice and neatly into neat little piles, right? He was a bit like that. So he got everything lined up with the table, yeah? Mm-hmm. Notes and stuff. And just while we were chatting, he was only just fiddling while he would, like anyone would fiddle with stuff. But he was lining everything up. And once he got it absolutely perfect, I kind of, inverted commas, accidentally leaned across the table and brushed it all irregular again.
Oh, man. Okay.
To see what would happen. And he just looked at me and laughed. And at that moment, there was an insight between us, and that could have gone horribly wrong, granted, but I take
wow.
risks. But
that is risk-taking.
That moment, because I don't come from an academic background. I was also the truck driver. Mm-hmm. I come from a working class background. And at that moment, we were of the same mind, because he saw what I did, I saw what he did, and it was a joke between us. And, we didn't dwell on it very much, but it was interesting to me how he had insight to himself and to me, and I had insight into him and me. You know what I mean? We had that kind of reference point.
And I was going to say, and to you as well, because he was able to make a joke of it.
Yeah. And that I don't know what I learned from that experience. I guess I learned that. I learned just something that couldn't be academically put down. I learned what we all know, that people in prison are ordinary people. They have done extraordinary things sometimes, but a hell of a lot of them are just ordinary people with the same hang-ups and the same sense of humour. And I've had a cigarette with someone who's killed many, many children. He bought me a card for my wedding.
Wow.
and for a prisoner to buy you a card is actually quite a thing. Obviously, I'm quite pleased that the prison service posted it to me, not him. Right. I don't want to know my address.
Your address, right?
I'm glad he will never get out again because he's killed many children and would kill many children again. But in the situation we were in, he was a nice guy. We got on really well. I see him on the TV sometimes, and the images are processed to make him look evil, which I think is despicable because it stops telling people. People should know that ordinary people can be dangerous.
Yeah,
the idea that killers are all mad-eyed freaks is dangerous to us.
And I'm not even saying it out of sympathy for these people, but for the sake of everyone and for people.
Absolutely. Sod them.
Even as a cautionary tale.
Absolutely. No, I'm not interested in him at all in that aspect. Even though we got on fine, we knew each other for a couple of years, and it was great. And, and I thought he was a really nice guy, so long as he's banged up and doesn't see light of day again. But that in itself is a lesson, isn't it? It's the Pulp Fiction lesson. The film teaches us that the Pulp Fiction film teaches us that no matter what you do for a living, you have ordinary needs and ordinary fears and ordinary, stuff.
The hitmen eating cheeseburgers and stuff like that. Yeah. No, yeah, that's so true.
I'm misquoting the Bible.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, because the Samuel Jackson's character is religious. But yeah, it's funny because I think even I catch myself doing that when someone does something so heinous that we can't even get it to compute. We can't understand how they could do that. We want to see them as the other. We want to fully demonize them.
Absolutely.
And it reminds me of, like, we were talking about the death penalty earlier, and in Connecticut, and it still haunts me. It was probably a few years back. I don't know if it made the news over there. There was a story about the Pettit family. There was this doctor, I forget his first name, last name Pettit, and it was him, his wife, and two daughters, kind of like this ideal family living in a big home in Connecticut. And there are these two convicts who had been released. I don't even want to say their names because it's kind of like I wish they could be erased from the history books. But instead of just trying to start their lives again or whatever, these two guys hook up and decide to commit, just this atrocious act, or I don't know how much of the act was spur of the moment. But anyway, they target this house. They beat the father severely with a pipe or something, tie him to a pole in the basement. One of the convicts stays with the family, while another one makes the wife drive him to a bank and goes, makes her go into the bank and withdraw a bunch of money, and she manages to convey to the teller that she's being held hostage and something really bad's going on. And so the police kind of canvass the area, but it takes them a while. I don't know if it's an hour or more before they actually enter the house. And in that interim, one of the criminals rapes the youngest daughter, who isn't even a teenager yet, and another one of the criminals thinks, hey, that's not fair. Why do you get to do that? So he rapes the wife. Then they decide they have to destroy the evidence. So they burn the whole house with the two daughters and the wife inside tied up. They burn alive to death, and the father manages to escape and get to the neighbors. And all this happens before the police take action. And even though Connecticut didn't have the death penalty, there was a lot of conversation of whether it should be implemented again because of that case. And that's one of those cases I hear about it, and I think, like, these guys should be slowly cut into 1-inch cubes and dumped into a Shark Tank or something. Just like all these horrible things coming.
I think mind. when I talk about my experience, it's very easy to make the mistake that I feel sympathy for these people. Mm-hmm. That's not it at all. I mean, for example, I don't believe in capital punishment, but I'll give you the reason, well, a very simple reason why I don't. Imagine you have these two guys. It's it's not an unimaginable situation. It's the same guys you're talking about, okay? Mm-hmm. And they go to a bank and they hold the bank up, and they've got all the staff in the bank, and they shot one of them. Now, the police surround the bank and say, "Come out of your hands up." Now, I would say, in society A, the message from the police is, "Look, come on in. You're only going to make it worse for yourself now. Come on in because you can't get out of this situation."
Right.
In society B, shall we say America, the police can only say, they can lie maybe, they can tell stories, but ultimately these guys know they've killed someone and they're going to burn. What's to stop them killing more hostages and shooting their way out and doing whatever they can? Purely because it's human nature, no matter what these people have done. I'm not no sympathy for them at all. But the fact is, human nature, they're going to try and preserve their own life at the cost of anyone else's. So it's very practically...
That's an interesting point.
The death penalty costs lives.
So instead of acting as a deterrent in certain cases, you're saying...
It encourages.
Yeah, because you're going to do whatever you can to avoid being captured.
Sure.
Wow.
That's my take on it.
Yeah.
You know, I've got plenty of other reasons. It's very expensive to kill people. Incredibly. They're much more cheaper to keep them in prison with their lives.
Well, that's fun. That reminds me of how, the states, conservative states that still have the death penalty here, and they were getting some of their drugs from, I think, European countries that decided they no longer wanted to be involved with capital punishment. So it left, like, these prison systems trying to get their hands on these drugs in all sorts of weird, shady ways. Very bizarre.
Wow. It's just weird, isn't it? It does seem to me irrational to kill people. Irrational and counterproductive. That's all, really. And I suppose rationality is what I appeal to all the time.
And there is one argument to be made, too, and this probably make me look like somewhat of a sadist, but some of us will say another reason for keeping the people alive in a retributive context or whatever is that perhaps staying alive in prison is a worse punishment than quickly being killed.
But I kind of don't care. I mean, once they're out of circulation, I don't care.
Yeah, and that was kind of my response to, I told you about that guy who we found out afterwards was an atheist who supported LGBT causes on Facebook and all this stuff, and he shot point blank in the head these 3 innocent Muslim kids. I think the post, I don't post a lot on news sites, but it moved me enough that I posted on the Huffington Post. I said, well, whatever he was, he certainly, judging by his actions, wasn't a secular humanist, and we need to remove this guy from society and throw away the key. So I didn't say I didn't even care if we killed him or not. I just thought a person like this can't be in society.
Yeah. Selfishly, at the moment, I'm not doing this for various reasons. I'm not involved in that aspect of my work at the moment. But selfishly, what can I learn from a corpse?
Well, as a psychologist, yeah, that's very true. And
also, when we're talking about the worst offenders, aren't those the people we need to learn from most to try and stop people being the worst offenders?
That's actually a great point, too, and I wish you weren't being so reasonable and
I can be unreasonable.
But no, that's a great point, too, and I have to admit, as someone who's kind of fascinated by psychology myself, I actually think that is a great resource to find out more about the human, I don't know, the human depths or what.
I would say we aren't very good at it.
No, and one thing I've been, and this kind of ties in, so I'll selfishly bring up this point that's been knocking around in my head the last few days. I've been thinking a lot about objective morality recently, and it's something I didn't even really care or think. Well, I think I thought about it in my own way. I'm not a trained philosopher, but I've been hearing the term objective morality being brought up in a lot of theist versus atheist.
I just interrupt you to say that I'm not sure what a trained philosopher is, but we'll let that go.
I'm just like a naturally philosophical person. No, and sometimes
a trained philosopher sounds like a non-philosopher, but I'll let it go.
And so I'm a naturally philosophical person, and sometimes I think that a philosophy degree can do more harm than good sometimes, because then you get these people kind of, instead of bringing up rational philosophical arguments and questions, you have these kind of trained individuals gazing at their own navel and bringing up arguments from 400 years ago that might not even be
No one taught me to play the bass guitar, and therefore I don't copy anybody else's style.
That's a good point, and I didn't know you played the bass. So that's I sing and write lyrics. But no,
I pretend I can do that, and I do play guitar as well. But on live, when I'm playing live, I don't at the moment, not for many years, but I've only ever played live bass. But like I say, I self-taught, and so I don't play. What I play comes from me, and maybe my what I've heard in the past. Well, certainly what I've heard will influence me. Mm-hmm. But because I wasn't taught, you'd struggle to see exactly who I've copied, if you like. Now, what your point on philosophy is exactly the same point, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, yeah. And if I can draw another parallel, this sounds kind of egotistical or arrogant, but I'm a naturally artistic person. I've been basically drawing and sketching or doodling.
I can't do that.
Yeah, since basically since the crib. My parents have like baptismal paperwork and stuff that has doodles of lions and things on it, and probably not my well, if I did it on a baptismal pamphlet, I probably got a hold of it later. I'm sure I wasn't an infant who just got dunked and started drawing. But anyway, literally, exactly. But literally, since I was small enough to still have to be kept in a pen, but could stand up, I was doodling and drawing and things like that. And when other kids were doing stick figures, I was kind of hinting at musculature and drawing kind of more fleshed out things. And teachers in school, art teachers and my parents and relatives would always try to push me to get professional art lessons, but I would resist because I would say, I want to do it my way. I don't want anyone else to teach me. And I think there could be merit to that, but sometimes it can be folly too. Like there
are things to learn from other people. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of like Picasso. Like if you look at Picasso, I was blown away. I bought this little illustrated book about Pablo Picasso, and we're used to seeing like his blue period or his cubist period and these things that kind of naysayers would say it looks like a kid could draw, or I could draw that, Yeah, right. But if you look at early works of Picasso, I think possibly still in his teenage years, it's stuff that looks like it's from the Baroque period or maybe the Renaissance.
I see. I'm into Dali, and however weird Dali is, the artwork is incredible.
Or even like the persistence of time, you see the melting clocks, but you also see the light glimmering off the metal of the clocks.
The glasses, when he paints a glass, or your glass or whatever, a wine glass, I think it's almost photographic to me.
Yeah, and that's kind of the great thing about it. And that's what some people say, is that you should learn the rules, then break them and do things your own way. That's one school of thought. But to me, maybe it's just a rebellious streak in me. I'm still afraid that the rules might poison the well or erase some of the natural creativity.
Well, once you decide which way you're going to fall, you're stuck, aren't you? Because if you decide, okay, I do need to learn the rules, you'll never know what it's like to have not learned the rules.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't, you'll wonder
epistemology for beginners.
Yeah, and if you're the type of person who eschews the rules and never wants to learn because you're afraid it will kind of pollute your creativity,
you'll never know what you could have learned.
Yeah, and you'll wonder if you've been kind of crippled or put at a disadvantage to some degree because you don't know the strong fundamentals or whatever.
Well, we agree on this, but this was the distraction. You were saying you were thinking about morality.
Oh yeah, about a so-called objective morality. That, I guess the way the Christian apologist would put it is that there's an etched in stone, or rather etched in the heart of man, morality. They think some deep, like God kind of etches set morals and principles in the hearts of men. And that's why even the heathens and pagans who existed before Jesus knew
Number 7.
right from wrong or something like that. You know what I mean?
Insult number 7.
Yeah, but what I think that I've been wondering lately, but if we look at things like Boko Haram and ISIS and things, and I won't bring up the
Yep.
yeah, we wonder. Now, here's my question. Maybe as a psychologist, you can address this. Does the person who commits these atrocious acts, these beheadings and whatnot, or the enslavement of young women, do they really believe they're doing it in the name of their religion? And do they really believe that that makes it right and noble? Or does some part of them know that it's wrong?
You said Craig had to be convincing himself.
Right, William Lane Craig, right.
Now, if you're going to give it to Craig, surely these people deserve it more than Craig does.
Right.
They're more ignorant, they tend to be less educated. Mm-hmm. I mean, some of these people are well educated. Don't get me wrong, but they're much more bound into a controlling society without freedom of thought, without freedom of religion, where apostasy laws do exist. You could regard their existence as being in a total institution, which of course is of an interest to me, because total institutions are, extreme situations. I don't see why you would ever want to grant Craig the luxury of being able to say that he's convinced himself and not grant it to these people.
Yeah, and I just thought of another point that kind of strikes a blow to objective morality, and it's the Bible itself. If there's an objective morality where we should love everyone like our neighbor, and we all know this to be true, it's better to be kind than cruel and all this, then what about the Old Testament atrocities? What about saving the young virgins for yourself? What about dashing the babies against the rocks? Where is the objective morality written in the hearts of men there?
I think the excuse could be...
well, the Christian apologists say God gets to make the rules and break.
Yeah. Well, let's just put that aside. I think I was hearing an interesting comparison between Islam and Christianity. Now, I innately, I recognise in myself, perhaps irrationally, the desire to back the underdog a bit, to recognise the friends I've had who I've lived with who are Muslim and as rational as you and me. And I also want to attack my home religion, if you like, Christianity, rather than something that's alien to me, like Islam. So if you just take as a record that it's almost instinctive in me to be a bit more Affleck and a bit less Harris.
I get you. Right?
But I recognise that's the important thing, isn't it? Not that you were a bigot, but that you recognise you were a bigot. That's the important thing. So parking that, the issue of what led me into this line of thinking?
We were talking about objective morality.
I've got it. Yes. No, I've got it. Is that the comparing Islam to Christianity? The argument against my, if you like, underdogism and my what might be wrongly perceived as pro-Islam. The argument against that is that whereas Christianity can be seen to have overwritten itself, like you have the Old Testament, and it gets overwritten by the New Testament.
Right.
Islam, Christianity, if you like, becomes softer as it develops. Now, the Islamic texts do the opposite. They overwrite the softer stuff with harder stuff as Islam became stronger. So, if you like, it's just by pure happenstance that Islam was written while the people who wrote it were getting stronger and therefore more aggressive, if you like, whereas Christianity reflects, by pure happenstance, a softening progression. And that this might be the two differences. If we're going to compare two stupid things, Christianity and Islam,
right.
Christianity could be seen to as progressing softer, whereas Islam could be progressing tougher. in its doctrine, in the original texts. And I thought that was interesting. So I can see a case for saying the old law was overwritten with the new law, that the arrival of Christ parked all of the Old Testament and stuff. But we are really playing around with bollocks, aren't we?
The cafeteria stuff just comes up again because, on the other hand, there's that bit, the Gospels do contradict one another at times. But there is the bit about where Jesus says, "I have come not to destroy, but to fulfill the law." And he states how important it is, and every jot and tittle, the old law has to be followed. And then even some cafeteria Christians, I don't like, we don't have to take this part of the Old Testament seriously. Oh, but the anti-gay stuff, of course we still like that,
Well, this is the thing. I think that the English, anyway, maybe not so much some of the Scottish, some of the Irish, but English Christianity is very much Jesus meek and mild, turn the other cheek. Basically, you could sum up most, not all, but most of English Christianity with maybe 5 quotes from Jesus, and the nice ones, and then say that's a religion.
And it's funny because I remember, I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was Dominic Crossan or who it was exactly, but I was watching some documentary many years ago, and they were talking about, that's one of the prime examples of Christianity as or illustrations of Christianity as a religion of peace. The whole thing about turning your other cheek rather than striking your enemy, and how that could be seen actually as a sign of rebellion or of not submitting. Instead of turning the cheek in a pacifistic way, turning the cheek like, all right, hit the other one too. I still don't give up.
There's a third version, which is dropping your trousers and showing your cheek that way.
Oh, like Braveheart.
Yeah.
But and that kind of goes into, I haven't finished reading it, but Reza Aslan's book, Zealot, is all about how, Jesus may actually have been more of this kind of rebellious political activist figure than most.
I think it's almost pointless now, though, isn't it?
We'll never know for certain now.
Exactly. It's so contradictory. There's so much mush in there that, frankly, it doesn't really matter what you believe in. You can find it in Christianity. You can find it in the Old Testament, New Testament. You can find it in Islam. You can find it whatever you want to believe. It's fine. You can rationalize it with the book. Just choose your book.
Well, it's funny. One thing I still wrestle with, not that it matters, it's just kind of like a interesting little theological exercise for myself, is I can remember even as a kid when I first heard the bit where Jesus says, I've come to bring a sword and talk about dividing, family and this and that. And to me, that's, from the first time I heard it, it sounded figurative. Like what he's saying is so radical that it's going to divide people. And here I'm almost giving, I'm providing the opposition with excuses or rationalizations.
Sure, but
then the stuff about selling the cloak to get a sword, you're like, what is that? But you can't really.
This is that famous story, isn't it? I don't understand why people want to play around Christianity. I like it in the original King James. Mm-hmm. That story that someone really said that, didn't they? I don't forget who it was. I don't mess around with Christianity. The original King James is good enough for me. As if the original King James wasn't 1,500 years after
copies of copies have been made.
And it seems to me that that if for you to try and interpret these passages is fruitless. It's a translation of a translation of a translation of a story that was a fable before it was a fable, and probably even then is really an appeal to some much older document and an attempt to make Christ fit into an older set of principles and beliefs. And it seems to me beyond pointless now to because, like I say, what I've learned the last few years, if anything. Probably not very much, maybe, but what I have learned is that it's what we read in the King James, for example, is so removed, and it's so culturally, but the context is gone. We can't, like I said, I'd love to go back, like you would, and a time machine and see what happened, but it seems it's almost like we found some gold tablets and some squiggles on it and made up what it meant.
Yeah, and it's a good point because I think people who are inclined to do so, like myself, we might still be, we have a passion for wrestling with this stuff, but maybe you have to come to some kind of grips that you're most likely not going to solve much unless there's some new archaeological discoveries that suddenly shine a light on things or something like that. Because you're right, we're dealing with copies of copies and translations of translations.
Yeah. And I have to rely on people like Price and people who actually understood who, to a degree, can understand the original language, but not the culture. They can understand the language, maybe, and they've done a great job. And I really admire what they've done. I wish I could do it. If I could read Greek, it'd be great. If I could read any of those old languages, it'd be great. But even if I could, I cannot put it into a cultural context. I do not know what it was like to live and breathe a Roman invasion or whatever.
That's right. I mean, Jesus spoke Aramaic, and the first Christians were essentially Jews. It was a Jewish movement. But by the time the Gospels were written, these were probably fairly well-educated Hellenistic people writing in Greek, maybe Hellenistic Jews. I think it's thought that Luke might have been a Gentile or whatever. But
if you want to get along, though, you've got to talk Roman. I don't mean Latin. I mean talk Roman.
That's the way they'll understand it.
Well, a phrase that fit in.
Which is what they think is going on, I think, really with the Gospel of Luke.
Sure, you don't have to chop bits off your knob. No, you don't have to do that. It's fine.
Forget about the dietary laws.
No. None of that's a problem. And in fact, you pay your taxes because give to Caesar what is Caesar's. It all fits in with your society, no problem at all. No worries.
Don't rock the boat. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think I think that you call it Roman Catholicism. I think for a reason. It's all of our Christianity that we have now, almost all of it. To be fair, there are exceptions, but almost all of it is translated through development of the Catholic Church, which itself was a Romanization of a very obscure cult, which happened to take off in certain quarters amongst certain. I mean, this is so convoluted, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Roman Emperor Constantine, and then there's all these arguments over did he actually convert to Christianity? He seemed to employ all this symbolism that celebrated the Roman sun god and things like that. And then not to get too Dan Brown, because one thing I hate about Dan Brown is the way he just kind of
writes.
Yeah. I had to stop myself from swearing. I was going to use some real strong vulgarity about the way he basically deflowers history, or the way he kind of
but he has inspired some thought at least. But it is trash. It is Pulp Fiction
because he has the stuff about in his version the Council of Nicaea is where the Bible is assembled. But really, it's afterwards with Eusebius and Constantine orders up some unified Bibles or whatever. And I think the Council of Nicaea was more about setting a date for Easter.
That's correct.
The nature of the divinity of Jesus and this and that. Yes. And but still, to go to your point, it shows how man-made it really all is.
Absolutely, it seems to me. I mean, don't get me wrong. It is interesting, and I listen to Robert Price whenever he's on anything.
Mythicism.
I'm really interested in it. And Carrier and who wrote Nailed? Was it David? Nailed 10 reasons why Christ probably never existed at all.
It wasn't
David
Carrier,
Silverman,
was it? I forget.
Silverman, I think.
I know I'm familiar. I haven't read Nailed, but I know the title because I just saw it mentioned in a debate I was watching.
If only we had a computer in front of us.
If only.
Nailed 10 Christian myths that show Jesus never existed by David Fitzgerald.
Now I'm trying to think who the heck David Fitzgerald is.
I think he's an atheist.
I would hope so. Yeah. That's William Lane Craig's new pen name.
No, because it was this sort of work that started to push me towards mythicism from, absolute mythicism, as opposed to there may have been a guy that wandered around the desert, because it was this whole idea that Paul doesn't actually, in his writing, suggest a guy actually existed. It's more of a culty kind of, it all happened in heaven kind of thing.
Yeah, like the mythicist, and that's funny because one of your fellow countrymen, I haven't done that many interviews, but one of the interviews I did was with, I might mention this to you, an English playwright named Alexander Nye, who did what he billed as the first atheist play about Jesus, and it was heavily inspired and incorporates mythicist ideas about this figure known as the Christ angel and all these different things about how it was all this kind of symbolic, all this kind of theater that took place in the ether or whatever. Very strange. And no, it's fine. You're probably familiar. You seem very well versed on this stuff. So, but Bart Ehrman or Ehrman.
I love Bart Ehrman.
Yeah, and no, he was the first. I learned from him, and this blew my mind the first time. Speaking of copies, he always talks about that. How one of the most pivotal stories of the New Testament, the story of the woman taken into adultery or whatever it is, about when Jesus says,
first stone.
Yeah, let him who be without sin cast the first stone or whatever.
Yes, that's one of the quotes that English Christianity would use.
And that's supposedly, according to Ehrman, an interpolation, meaning a later add-on. And supposedly that doesn't appear in the regular gospel, and some scribe added that in later. And it's one of the most pivotal stories in Christianity. And I even heard recently, it might have been on Real Time with Bill Maher, and not so recently, could have been like half a year ago or something. I think it might have been Ralph Reed or some right-wing Christian politician was on, and Bill Maher was trying to nail him down on, no pun intended, on the subject of adultery and how the Old Testament says, people should be killed for adultery. And I think Ralph Reed said, but Jesus saves the adulteress and says, let him who be without sin cast the first stone. And I'm thinking to myself, according to Bart Ehrman, this story is a complete interpolation and not even an invention and not even part of the original gospel story.
Oh, I did not know that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. That's crazy. It's hard it's a strange pill to swallow, even for a former Christian.
Well, that's a big one, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
That's like turn the other cheek and first stone are the cliches of how Christian are you kind of thing. What kind of Christian would that make you? Their kind of whole terminology, how Christian of you? That sort of stuff all turns on this whole thing about meek and mild, whatever the children, whatever that one is, first stone, turn the other cheek. Bang, that's it. That's your modern English Christianity in a nutshell. And a big tenet of that has just been taken away. You destroyed my faith, Phil.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to make you an atheist again. But it is funny trying to figure out, was there a historical Jesus or not? One thing I still kind of not cling to like I want to be true, but maybe seems like a grain of evidence, is that supposedly these certain members of the early church, like Peter and James, the supposed brother of Jesus, that there were some figures in the early church who supposedly actually knew Jesus, but who even knows if this is correct? But if you think about it, the champion of Christianity is the early Christian movement is really Paul.
Absolutely,
and
the colossal apostle.
And Paul, that's right. And Paul, as we were saying earlier, the Pauline letters and the epistles were written before the Gospels. So if this is his baby and the Gospels come afterwards, it's like who the hell knows what's true and what isn't?
Yeah, and I think if let's just say you had some kind of idea of something that happened in the heavens, and that was the cult that was being followed in Rome. Isn't it natural that you might try and attribute that to humans who really walk the earth? Isn't that kind of predictable?
And who knows, like, I had one pet theory, I don't even know if it's true. There's another podcaster I'm really good friends with named Chris Webber. He hosted a podcast, C-Web Sunday School, and I've talked about...
Sure, but not anymore.
Now he does Paranormal Skeptic Academy, and I actually interviewed him about that probably a few episodes back. But we've talked about whether or not Jesus may have been some kind of composite figure, that there was a lot of people crucified by the Romans, and a number of them could have been would-be messiahs. Did this inspire some kind of myth or belief? I don't know. Who knows?
Well, exactly. And if you were going to try and attribute some real humans to the story that you've already got, and there happened to be some, or three people, shall we say, one who was a carpenter, one who wandered around the desert, apparently healing people, another. Why wouldn't you just drag them in, just like you drag Christmas in to, the pagan rituals? I mean, the Christianity is probably the most parasitic religion there is.
Yeah, and well, that is very true, and it almost reminds me of the Borg from Star Trek.
Yes, absolutely. And in England,
resistance is futile.
Yeah, you might not have this so much in America because you haven't got a history. I mean, because you've got quite a short history. But you've got to look at where I am right now. In a very ancient landscape, and on the tops of hills there are churches. Well, those churches aren't the tops of those hills by coincidence. They're planted on top of pagan places.
Right.
And it's over and over again. You find a church in the middle of an ancient stone circle, in the middle of ancient banks that are sometimes thousands of years old. Geographically, physically, they're parasitic. Conceptually, they're parasitic. In terms of philosophy, they're parasitic. I got to say, it's one of the religions that annoys me most, just because it is crushed so much underfoot.
And this is
maybe Christianity didn't, but Rome did.
And this is something that now it's kind of my turn to embrace the underdog. And this shows maybe a bit of hypocrisy on my part, because if you're going to kind of ridicule or be critical of the supernatural claims of a religion, maybe you should do it across the board. But I still really heavily like I spoke about my early love of mythology and whatnot.
Sure.
I still really romanticize the pagan religions. And
the loss that Catholicism stamped out worldwide as well. It's not even over here, but it's South America. It's across Europe. It stamps out these. Yeah, I have the warm and fuzzies about these old beliefs as well, and I want to see them and I want to enjoy them, and as a psychologist to understand them, and someone who's interested in culture to get to grips with these varying beliefs and compare them, and they're just been stamped out, and it's offensive.
It's sad,
isn't it?
And you guys have some of the best ones. I think the theory is a lot of gods in different cultures that had been Christianized ended up becoming like diminutive. They ended up becoming house spirits, brownies, and sprites, and things like that.
Well, there's in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, I don't know. I don't know if you know much about bog bodies.
Oh yeah,
there's about 300 bog bodies.
The tannin in the bogs turns them into these leathery corpses.
Sure, and these were often triple killed, overkilled.
Right, that wasn't like bludgeoning.
No. Triple killed and buried in a bog. It does look very ritual, and amongst in the same sort of places in bogs are old Iron Age swords and whatever, and Bronze Age implements for the Bronze Age earlier ones. And in one place, they found this huge urn full of butter buried in the bog, and in Ireland. And they said that on this, I can only take their word for it because it was a pretty poor program. But the program recorded that even in living memory, people used to take lumps of butter and put it in the bog. So you've got a tradition there that's 6,000 years old.
I'm tripping over my tongue. So let's just say tribute. Tribute to the gods or the spirits. Yeah, I think I remember saying the bodies, they'll have a noose, but it also looks like they may have been clubbed, throat slit or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, but you're right, like ceremonially killed in a variety, as you say, triple killed. I think, even things like obviously there's pagan roots to Christmas and Easter.
Sure.
And Christmas, I mean, you not only there's some Roman influence, things like Saturnalia and stuff like that, and then on top of it, you have the Nordic influences too, with the evergreens and the things like that, and Santa Claus is part Odin. Oh, and the Green Man, and then Easter, I believe, is supposedly at least partly inspired by the celebrations of a pagan fertility goddess.
Sure.
And you have the hares and the eggs, and
well, you can see this as a drinker in this country. You see this all the time. There's a lot of pubs called the Green Man,
And
There's a
that's
lot of pubs called the
real
Wheat Chief.
pagan stuff.
Sure, a lot of pubs called the Wheat Chief. Everyone's forgotten what all this comes from. Everyone's forgotten what the basis of the words even, and this is only a few hundred years, let alone a couple of thousand, and everyone's forgotten. And even 200 years ago, the culture is so alien to us now. It's quite hard for us to slide in and think we understand these people just by reading them. Not everyone was as eloquent as the founding fathers in America, and when you think, to tie this back into what we've just been saying, these lost understandings, which are actually not that far removed from us now in this country. Like I say, we still drink in pubs called the Green Man, and yet that's the same language, it's the same basic culture. It's there's a lot of things are similar, and yet we struggle to understand the people of a few hundred years ago. What chance have we got to really understand
2,000 years ago?
Yeah, and so when an apologist says what it really means is this,
right?
The only words that should come to mind are the word bollocks. Mm-hmm. It's the only thing to say. It's you're making it up as you go along, mate, and you're trying to make up what you believe or what your own maybe part instinctive morality and partly painted on by society. You're just going back and trying to find something even though it's been translated several times, which you can attach somehow to what you're trying to say. So whenever they go to a Bible quote, the only response is bollocks.
Yeah, and it's funny because you look at things like scholars are still kind of wrestling with how much trust should we place in Herodotus or like these early historians, and then something that may have been written as figurative religious literature, trying to look at that as if it's journalistic accuracy. But it's because wasn't it the modern Wiccan movement? Was that founded in England? I think, but
a lot of it was, and of course, it's like Druidism. It's got very little to do with. I mean, Druidism got nothing at all to do with Druids.
Yeah, that's there's still a big mystery, aren't they? Just who the Druids actually were and what they did.
I think that our only we don't think they wrote anything down. The only access we'd have to Druids is pretty much Julius Caesar and maybe one or two other other Roman writers. So you're asking a bunch of Americans who, well, English to be honest, probably, with a few guns, who want a bit of land and blast away a load of Indians and get shot at them and round them up and infect them with smallpox. And then you ask them what those Indians believed.
What their culture's like or whatever.
Yeah, of all people, those are the last people.
Yeah.
And they don't care either.
I don't know if it was Caesar who wrote about now we famously have the Burning Man, but there's supposed to be the ritual of the Wicker Man where they
you take us back to that film over and over. You've got to take us back there, haven't you? The
Burning Man. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. Yeah,
this is my mind, not yours, Phil.
No, it's funny is that because they're talking about having sympathy, and it's kind of an underdog thing for like pagan religions and traditions. But let's say if Druidism did survive, and let's say they actually did, as suggested, practice human sacrifice, we'd probably be wagging our fingers at the Druids like we wag them at the Christians.
Sure. Well, but I don't see why we would contest. I mean, like sometimes with arguments, it seems to me that you have to go with the. If you've got a choice between yes or no, you go with what you've got, don't you? And it seems to me we've got bog bodies.
Someone was being killed.
Triple death. And we've got Julius Caesar saying these people killed people.
Right.
Now, maybe they didn't. But let's just say on the balance of probabilities, I guess it would not be surprising that to find that this religion, for want of a better word, that these people had involved human sacrifice. Why not?
Since it was fairly common all over the globe.
Yeah, I mean,
from the Americas to the Mideast.
Absolutely. The bog bodies are a lot older than the society that Julius Caesar came upon, and the Celtic invasion came after the bog bodies. So Rome was invading a pre-invaded society. So who knows?
Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about your petition and where people can go to sign it?
Sure. Well, there is a petition out there in order to put pressure on the British legal system to not necessarily solve my case, but solve the problem with the precedent to stop us being in a position where a Islamic man might be sent to a synagogue, or a Catholic might be sent to a mosque, or I might be sent to a Catholic church. So we need to stop this now when it's first happened. There's a petition, and the best way to get to it is go to the Skepticule Facebook page, where the first item is a link that sends you to the petition, because petition links are painful. So that's the best way to get there. You can always hear me on Skepticule, which is as it sounds, Skepticule. And I tend to just record a piece for Skepticule and give it to the guys, and they reply, basically. And unfortunately, I'm usually not there to get into an argument about it, which I quite like. So I have that's the relationship I've got with Skepticule, which is one I enjoy, which is just I send something in, and I don't have to do what you have to do, Phil, and edit things. Apart from myself.
Harrowing.
I edit myself down to, I try to get something down to a 5-minute argument, bang. And I'm not sure how successful I am, but you probably can tell from our rambling conversation that I tend to think about all sorts of things.
Now I'm thinking, I don't know if I'll include all the history stuff, because you come off as much smarter than me on the history. So
if you edit it well, I'm sure you'll make it sound
I'll
the other
edit
way
it in a way where I sound very erudite.
Yeah. And what you can do is get my hesitations and just put them on repeat after everything you say, so I sound like a git.
It's like that video of Dawkins on YouTube where they ask him for an example about mutation, and for like 20 minutes.
No, I'm thinking about the one where he said, "Oh, we're all from aliens. We all come from comets." That cut up one.
Yeah, I think that was not Ben. What's that guy's name? Yeah, I don't know if it's Ben Stein. No, what?
Ben Stein.
Ben Stein, that's it. And he did that horrible, awful movie called Expelled, yes, which takes a very sympathetic look to creationism.
Fascinating.
And they did a very kind of selective hack job on Dawkins in that one. Absolutely awful. But yeah, it sounds like you're starting to short out a little, I think, so I'll let you go. I can't hear you that well.
Oh, okay, Phil.
Oh, there you are. Oh, there. Yeah, you started to kind of crackle a bit.
Well,
yeah.
It's been fascinating. We've been talking before. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
It has been, and it just flew by. And yeah, so I don't know what the heck I'm going to do. I don't know if this is going to be what I'm guessing.
So
after
you do what you want, Phil, with it. As long as you don't.
After all the editing's done, it'll probably be at least 3.5 hours. I might be able to cull out.
If it wasn't so late, I could carry on talking about this stuff forever. You and I clearly think about the same sort of things. Absolutely.
And I think it would be great if at some point we should talk about history and ancient religion again. That'd be kind of like a breath of fresh air.
Disciplined. We'll be disciplined, won't we, Phil? We'll say we'll talk about this, and we won't talk about hijacked aircraft, and we won't talk about this, and we won't talk about that. We'll be very strict, disciplined, and we'll talk about what we said we would talk about.
That'd be excellent, because at some point, I've told a couple of people, at some point I plan to do a weekly podcast on mythology where I just look at a different myth or folk tale every episode. So I really love this stuff. It'd be great if sometime we talked about some of the early folk traditions and religious beliefs of pre-Christian Britain and things like that.
I can do some stuff there. I mean, what happened when I stopped being a truck driver and started educating myself, I planned to go to university to study archaeology. Mm-hmm. And I did. I studied archaeology for a year at university. But it wasn't working for me. It wasn't stretching me. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. It was probably a bad decision. But it was just something that drove me. And I think it's this search for authenticity, this search for the underlying reality, search for where we come from. It was a kind of drive in me. And that's why I went to archaeology, because that's the ultimate search for where we come from in this kind of global we. And then, of course, why wouldn't I transfer to psychology? Because isn't that where we come from?
You go from studying the rocks and the rubble to studying what makes a person
The
a
rocks
person.
and rubble in people's heads.
In
Yeah.
people's heads, that's right. But no, I think I was talking about the hypocrisy of liking ancient myths. I think it has to do with the fact that they're not practiced anymore and that we can enjoy them
Absolutely.
as
Yeah.
quaint symbolism from a distance.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
still have people trying to convince you that God flooding the world actually happened and things like
Yes.
that. That's when it gets ugly. Okay, so I want to thank you again, Steve, for coming on and not only sharing your personal story about this court case and the repercussions it could have at large regarding freedom of religion in Britain. But I also want to thank you just for a great, stimulating conversation on a number of topics. And you've been an excellent guest. And I hope you had a good time too. And I'm hoping to have you back again.
Thank you, Phil. It's been great. I've really enjoyed chatting. It's just been like two guys chatting in front of the fire, which suits me fine.
Absolutely. And we've been talking a lot off the record, so we've said goodbye a few times. So
now we're just recording the formal goodbye.
This is the formal goodbye.
So thank you, Phil. I've really enjoyed talking.
Me too. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for listening to this special episode of The Week in Doubt. If you enjoyed it, please consider donating to the show's upkeep by using the PayPal widget at palbertelli, palbertelli.podbean.com. The PayPal widget should be near the bottom of the page. Why is it hidden at the bottom? I don't know. And who knows if I'm able to monetize the show enough. Maybe I can stop swinging a hammer and make this my day job. Thanks again, and don't forget to sign Steve's petition. Thank you.